Warning: this is dark and gore, with more seinen than shonen fanfiction. If you're a bit sensitive or faint of heart, I strongly advise against listening to this. Otherwise, welcome to your new favorite fanfiction. Reincarnated as Shoto Todoroki, I thought I hit the jackpot. Being the child of a hero was supposed to be a lucky draw, until I learned that from 10 among us, only 3 would reach adulthood. This world isn't the one I thought I knew. The strong do as they please, and the world has to bend to their will. In another life, I could have been a hero. In this one, I will make the world bend until it breaks, even if I have to destroy myself in the process. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Omni-sensei. Welcome to What If I Was Reborn as Shoto Todoroki? Modern-day terrorist. Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please gently exterminate the like button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the Todoroki family drama. What have you done? Viscera. Pieces of arms torn off. Bodies without heads. Shoto, what have you done? There was blood on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling. What have I done? The young man sat cross-legged on the grass, his cold, lifeless eyes piercing through him. He was bathed in blood from head to toe, and the man knew better than to ask if it was his own. The right question to ask would be, what did they do to me? The man knew. Of course, he knew. Everyone in the secret knew. But such a massacre, don't you think you've gone too far? Don't you think? The young man laughed. His interlocutor shuddered, the hairs on his neck bristling. He knew Shoto since he was a kid, but he had never once heard him laugh. Why are you surprised? You told me yourself that I am not a hero. The man froze. He looked down, unable to hold his gaze any longer. I think it hurt my ego a little bit at the time. But you were right, weren't you? Shoto raised his hands in a theatrical gesture, pointing to the lifeless bodies spread out around him. All of this is me. The man was afraid of what it meant. He licked his dry lips, clutching the hem of his windbreaker with shaking fingers. So that's what you've become? Someone who destroys without caring about the cost. Someone who only does what he wants to do. Shoto's face darkened. There was a storm brewing in his eyes, a kind of madness that was just waiting for the right moment to be unleashed onto the world. I've always been selfish, we both know that. It's just that, for a short time, I thought. He fell silent, unable to continue. His eyes became glassy, as if he was looking at something far away that he could never hope to reach again. And then anger distorted his face. The corners of his mouth dropped. His features became as hard as stone. He raised his cold eyes to the man. You know very well what I am going to say. Aizawa-sensei. Shoto stood up. Aizawa froze, horrified, his eyes never leaving the thing that had just rolled off his thighs and landed in a pool of blood. It was a human head. You, and all those among you who knew. Shoto leaned over Aizawa's shoulder, his warm breath brushing his ear. Aizawa watched him out of the corner of his eye. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple as he realized that his eyes were turning red, the 3 black commas turning lazily in his eyes. You are next. All he had to do was blink and the whole world disappeared. He found himself facing a carved obsidian door so high that it was lost in the clouds, so wide that one would have thought the horizon only made of it. He brushed it with the fat of his thumb and found himself on the other side. The other side was a dark place, a place of infinite space where everything was black. There was no sky, no earth, nothing in between. Everything was black, black, black. He thought he was alone until one of the things moved. They were creatures as dark as the scenery, so dark that the stillness made them invisible. They moved along the ground like shadows, their steps as light as the caress of the wind in the night. They had neither eyes nor ears. It was as if a black sheet had been placed on their foreheads and covered each of their excavations, giving them the silhouettes of men even though they were not. But he couldn't bring himself to be afraid, because he knew he was one of them. Murmurs grew from the crowd of mouthless creatures. He entered a circle of the closest shadows. They made room for him without paying him the slightest attention. The choice of the world is paramount, breathed the shadow facing him. To his left, the shadow made a sharp noise, the same noise that a tongue slammed against a palate would make. You think we didn't get it? But you saw the size of that damn will. It's bigger than the Eiffel Tower. No matter how many hours of talking and planning we do, it's more likely that we'll fall somewhere we never heard of. The shadow on the right clasped his fingerless hands together, quivering. Do you think they can be bribed? With enough money? The shadow on the left laughed, and it was a laugh as dry as it was contemptuous. Since the shadow had no mouth, it looked strange. It was as if the shadow was racked with spasms. You're one of those, huh? You must have been pretty loaded in the before to think you could buy those demons. The shadow on the right looked nervously around him. Don't call them that, Dash. Why? They do nothing but call us. Anyway, the third shadow, the one next to both, silenced them with a word. They can be bribed. I've seen it. His voice must have carried in a moment of collective silence because everyone in their direct proximity fell silent. Even shadows from other groups had turned their heads toward them. Some of them swelled the ranks of their little circle, gathering feverishly to hear what would happen next. The first shadow, the one who had the attention of all the others, cleared his throat. You can bribe them, yes, but not with money. There were murmurs. I saw a shadow ask them what he would have to pay to be able to choose his after. The speaker was silent for a few seconds. The newcomer interpreted this as a pause to find his words. He told them he would give them anything they wanted. He told them they had only to name it. Diamond mines or a mountain of gold. Their price was his. The shadow on the left clutched his arms to his chest. His shoulders were wobbling. What's next? One of them spoke. She said they wanted her soul again. A stunned silence. It's not. How? You're lying. The storyteller ignored them. And then the shadow exploded. The newcomer imagined one of the creatures exploding like a bomb. He saw the black skin split like a broken mirror before scattering in the air. Imagined a white light coming out of the stomach. He saw the other side illuminated for a fraction of a second by a blindingly white sun. He felt its warmth, saw its light, envisioned its horror, like a dying supernova. And then everything disappeared, reduced to the infinite nothingness of this in-between. You're lying. The shadows elbowed each other, anger seeping out of them. The newcomer had heard enough. He left to avoid being caught in the fray. He moved through the darkness, eavesdropped to bits of conversation here and there. Is to be an Uzumaki? Are you kidding me? The probability of being the new Jinchuriki is crazy as hell. And then the Akatsuki will inevitably come after you. One of them responded smugly. Not if I get strong enough. The other shadows looked exasperated. Where do you think you are? You're not the protagonist. You won't have any plot armor. If the world is a tiny bit realistic, you'll have more chances to be killed by a genin with a butter knife than to be able to fight Itachi 1-on-1. The new shadow continued to walk, moving without a sound between the discussion circles. Chronicle. Find the stone. Fairy tale? Telekinesis. They talked and talked. There was nothing else to do but talk. So why not talk? He overheard a conversation that piqued his interest. The technique is to catch the wheel and throw it with a slight angle of the wrist. One of the shadows demonstrated, bending his wrist 20 degrees. The new shadow stopped, watching him curiously. The other creatures laughed. You know very well that it's all about karma, hissed one. Your cheap tricks won't change anything. The shadow who had demonstrated the throw straightened up, his chin raised. His voice sounded indifferent to the mockery. I've been here longer than you. She patted her chest where the number 411 glowed in white. And we've been here for a while too, and we've all seen what the wheels look like. It's just a matter of chance. And karma, each of the other torsos showed numbers ranging from 11,000 to 30,000. The new shadow looked down at his own chest and discovered the 77,777. Every 10 seconds, the last number changed to a lower value. Hey, are you new? The shadow accused of charlatanism approached him. She put his arm around his shoulders. How does it feel to be dead? The other shadows she was talking to whispered and then scattered. I thought we were all going to go crazy, but they did something to us in there. She tapped his head with his finger. And now nobody is afraid. She looked around, and the new shadow imagined that he would have seen affection in her eyes, if there were eyes. There's something familiar about this place. Isn't it? I feel like I'm home. The new shadow pushed the arm off his shoulders. Where are we? The in-between, the beyond, the bridge, whatever you want to call it. What do they expect from us? The new shadow didn't even know who he meant when he said, they. Perhaps they were the demons he had heard about? Maybe something else, some ageless, nameless creatures with infinitely superior abilities? They don't expect anything from us. The only thing we have to do is turn the wheels. Everyone had been talking about the wheels since he arrived. What is dash projectors lit up? A scene made of smoke appeared in the middle of the crowd of shadows. Everyone fell silent. The creatures lined up in tight rows, eagerly awaiting the show. Shut up and look. Newbie, a sudden wave of steam, as if someone had just turned over a pot full of smoke, poured out of the scene before drowning in the darkness. A wheel as big as the Empire State Building appeared from the white mist. The shadow looked up, but it was as if it had no end. The crowd split open to let one of the faceless creatures through. The number 1 shone on her chest. She went up on the stage amidst the whispers. Her head turned to the crowd as if she were looking at them all. Another wheel appeared between the shadow and the other behemoth. This one, however, was human-sized. Smoke billowed from the small wheel. 2 almost equal boxes were fighting for space. Yes and no. The charlatan whistled, admiringly. This guy must have pretty good karma to make his yes almost equal to the no. The shadow threw the first wheel. It was spinning at full speed while the thrower on the left nervously fiddled with his hands. What is the purpose of this wheel? It was not the charlatan who answered him, but the shadow on his right. It's the one that determines whether he will be able to remember his last life in the next one. The new shadow was surprised. This wheel was the smallest one, but it was by far the more dangerous of the 2. Memories and experiences shaped our being. To no longer have them was tantamount to the death of who we had been. The arrow stopped on a slot. The crowd stirred. TSS. Lucky on stage. The shadow was screaming and crying of happiness. The newcomer understood the reason of her joy, but she seemed rather pathetic to make a spectacle of herself like that. The charlatan leaned toward him. She did well for the first one, and if she falls on a relatively correct world after, the overexcited shadow had already launched the giant wheel. The charlatan shook his head. She should have thrown the wheel by tilting her wrist. The arrow stopped on a new slot. No one made a sound. It was one of the smallest slots, one of those as thin as hair, proving that even with a good karma, what's written on the slot? I can't see from here. Shingeki no Kyojin, the new shadow, looked around. Everyone looked very solemn. Is it bad? Well, let's say that if she falls on the Mar slot afterwards, we can only hope for her that she will have access to a loaded gun as soon as she arrives. Smoke exploded from both wheels. Their slots metamorphosed into others. On the first one, transmigration and other shared the space more or less equally. On the second, there was a whole bunch of names arranged randomly. The first will fell on other. This could mean anything and everything. A new explosion of smoke surrounded the second wheel. There were no more names but a list of objects and things that made little sense to the new shadow. The arrow turned. Artifact. Death Note. Kusunagi's sword. The rest was too small for him to read. Shadow number 1 was shaking like a leaf. She looked desperate. The arrow stopped on a square so big that everyone, no matter how far away, could read what was written there. Op no mi, whispered someone. The shadow cried tears of joy. No one gave him time to recover from his emotions when a third wheel appeared. This is where you see human nature at its best, said the charlatan. I've seen guys with great karma get cursed for 3 generations just because they wanted more. She elbowed the new guy. Listen to me carefully. If I can give you one piece of advice, it's to don't touch that damn last wheel, no matter how bad the rest of what you pulled is. She shook his head. The sin of greed, nothing worse for us humans. The newcomer wondered if anyone had warned the number one about the dangers, because he went to pull the wheel anyway. On this one, the red and black slots were exactly proportional. Karma did not seem to influence it. The arrow spun much faster than on any other wheel. The colors of the squares blended together until they became blurred lines of light. Shadow number 1 stood motionless, her long arms wrapped around her body like claws. If she had skin, she would have been covered in sweat. The arrow stopped on a square. A black square. The slot was a good size, but it was one of those slots that had a lot of things written in very small print. Like the clauses of a contract with the devil, thought the new guy. On stage, the shadow fell to her knees. The shadow on his right asked aloud, "What was it? What was that? What did she fall on?" No one answered him. The remnants of white smoke that floated around the floor coiled like snakes around number 1. When they dispersed, number 1 was gone. After that, the atmosphere became rather tense. None of those who passed afterwards opted for the 5th wheel. Everyone avoided it, even those who had drawn very bad squares. The numbers passed on stage without the new shadow being able to distinguish one from the other. Some cried, many got angry. Out of the 17,000 who passed before him, only 8 would keep their memories. Of these, 7 had good karma. The 8th was the charlatan. He took longer to throw the wheels than anyone else before him. He didn't even breathe in the vicinity of the last wheel. The numbers on the new guy's chest were dropping faster than he would have thought. He took part in conversations, heard without listening to the recommendations of others, speculated on where the arrow would land as if he were back in the south of France to discuss when and how the bullfight would end. Finally, it was his turn. The crowd of shadows opened like the sea to let him pass. He went to the scene with a quiet step, refusing to let terror or anguish overtake him. He was already dead. What was the worst that could happen to him? A cloud of smoke surrounded the first wheel. The shadow looked around, trying to get an overview of the in-between. As far as his gaze could see, he saw other spots of light fading and relighting at intervals. From a certain distance, even though he knew there were shadows, he was no longer able to distinguish them. It was as if they were one with this strange place. His head turned to the back of the stage, where the other shadows never went. He stopped and looked at the abyss. Then the abyss looked at him. His blood ran cold. He looked away, pretending he had not seen anything. He shook his hands to calm the tremors that agitated them. He had to concentrate on his throw. Putting the wrist at 20 degrees, the first wheel emerged from the smoke screen. The audience was stunned. "Dude, you've been killing babies in your spare time, or what?" The no was eating the entire wheel, leaving only a space as thin as a needle for the yes. He licked his dry lips. 20 degrees. The wheel spun wildly. He looked at it until his eyes could no longer distinguish one slot from another. He closed his eyes, taking a long breath to relax. Missing his shot meant he would die a second time. He didn't want to die. He heard the wheel slow down, and then the wind stopped whistling. "It's a joke, right?" He waited for another reaction from the audience so he could gauge his situation, but no one said anything else. So he opened one eye and looked. His breath caught in his throat. The golden arrow was on the perfect edge of yes and no, shaking madly as if it couldn't decide which side to point to. It was unreal, as if she was fighting to fall into the no, but something strong and intangible was always pushing her back to the yes. An icy breath rose from the dark side of the stage. The shadow's hair stood up. It was as if death itself was clutching him in its claws. The golden arrow stopped on the yes. Everyone was stunned. The shadow itself froze, blinking, and then he pulled himself together. Something strange had just happened, but it was to his advantage. It was not any time soon that he would start refusing privileges. He approached the second wheel where slots as thin as safety pins stood next to others as wide as books. He breathed in and put his hand on the wheel's handle. If whatever this thing was could still be with him, he checked that his wrist was well inclined of 20 degrees. Then he spun the wheel sharply. The wheel made a few turns before losing speed. He recognized a few names on the wheel, but the likelihood of him running into one of them was less than being struck by lightning. The shadow held his hands together, refusing to show any more nervousness. The arrow slowed down. It stopped on one of the largest slots, one of the black squares. Comics MC. Again the icy breath. The arrow moved an inch to the right. Boku no Hero Academia. Relief flooded the shadow. This was one of the only worlds he knew. The audience stirred. Hey, are you kidding us? What the hell is this? The shadow ignored them and moved on to the next wheel. This time he didn't even take the time to bend his wrist. He drew Transmigration. Then Shoto Todoroki. The arrow cheated on the first one but naturally stopped on the second. For his fourth wheel, the shadow decided to throw the wheel with his right hand, his weaker hand. Again, there was this cold breath from the abyss. Immutability of gifts. The crowd was on the verge of hysteria. One of the shadows clutched the stage, banging on it to get his attention. How do you do that, huh? Tell me and I promise you that in my next life dash, another of the creatures pushed him aside. It's really unfair that only you benefit, so please dash. A crowd of creatures stuck to the scene, hailing him here and there. The shadow ignored them, his attention focused on the fifth and final wheel, the wheel that should not be thrown. He hesitated. The smoke, at his feet, waited patiently for him to make his choice before taking him away. The charlatan had said that he had seen lucky people lose everything when they threw the last wheel. The sin of greed, he said. Fortunately, he had always been a greedy man. He grabbed the wheel and threw it before changing his mind. He felt the cold breath caress his skin and wrap around the spinning wheel. He closed his eyes, half excited and half worried. Would his gamble pay off? Or would he lose everything? He took a long breath to calm his nerves. He opened his eyes apprehensively. Chakra, this time he was sure. Someone had cheated for him. He dared to look into the abyss. A huge eye, almost as big as the second wheel, looked back at him. It was an intense blue eye, fluorescent, as cold as ice but shining with affection. As if he knew him, the shadow, amazed, lost himself in the contemplation of the eye. A myriad of emotions danced there. Sadness, suffering, love. He didn't even notice the vindictive shadows on stage. The white smoke wrapped around him in an affectionate, almost paternal embrace. The anger of the audience grew. There was shouting now, and the stage was shaking. The shadow disappeared at the same time that the hands of the other creatures closed on him. The eye closed as if in mourning. When he opened his eyes again, this time everyone could see him. A bright light burst from his eyes, sweeping away all other shadows in its path. Endeavor was a weird guy. I hadn't even had time to take my first breath in this new world that he snatched me out of the doctor's hands, laughing like a crazy man. Ray, we did it. Look at him, look at his hair. We did it. He was laughing so hard that my tiny baby body was shaking against his chest. His big bare paw, however, was wrapped around my body tightly, and I knew he wouldn't let me fall for any reason whatsoever. His vibrant blue eyes, almost electric, watched me with an intensity that almost frightened me. Welcome to you, Shoto Todoroki, my greatest creation. If I could have, I would have laughed right in his face. Alas, I was only a newborn. I fell asleep in his hand, head against his heart, of sleep of the one who knew he had hit the jackpot for his reincarnation. They're back. They're back. The oldest of the Todoroki looked up from the book in his hand. His sister took off down the hall like a rocket, arms flailing behind her back. Their brother, a little confused, ran after her and nearly stumbled on the shiny floor. Tuya closed his book sharply. Don't run too fast, Fuyu. She disappeared around the corner, Natsuo in her trail. Tuya sighed before leaving his room with slow steps, hands in his pockets. The baby's arrival was exciting for them because it was new, but it was already the third time for him. At the rate it was going, there would be 3 more in the next 5 years. He arrived at the front door just as the housekeeper was opening it. Their mother entered first, a cloud of steam leaving her lips. Natsuo and Fuyumi jumped around her and chirped happily, tugging at her jacket to get her attention. Rei looked a little surprised to see them still up, but she smiled affectionately. Good evening, Todoroki-sama. Tuya's eyes scanned their mother up and down. She had dark circles as long as his arm and her back was hunched over, as if she was bearing the weight of the world on her shoulders. Oh, Narumi, I thought the children would be in bed long ago." The old woman gave her a contrite smile. They were all too eager for the baby to come and sleep. Rei took off her scarf and tried to hang it on the coat rack. She missed it by a good 10 centimeters and almost dropped it. Tuya, who had slid to the front door with the agility of a cat, gently took it from her hands before hanging it up. "Leave it. I'll take care of it." A real smile lit up Rei's tired face. She let herself go as he helped her take off her coat. "My big boy, what would I do without you?" She stroked his hair affectionately. Tuya rolled his eyes but let her, suddenly remembering why this day was special. Tuya straightened up. "Where's the baby?" "Oh, with your father." Tuya was rather surprised. The last 2 times his parents had returned with a baby, it had been his mother who had held them, refusing to give custody to anyone, not even their father. With Dad. Her son's bewildered expression amused her. "I tried to pull him out of his clutches, but he wouldn't listen." Tuya scanned the cobbled entrance to their house, but it was too dark for him to see properly. There was too much snow in the driveway. So he went through the garage to park the car. "And since I didn't want to walk all the way from there," the housekeeper closed the door before rushing to Rei's side. "I have prepared your room as you asked, madam. There is chamomile, hot water bottles under the blanket, and the bath is still steaming." Tuya looked at the closed door, puzzled. He was pretty sure that his father had never been so adamant on taking care of one of them after birth that his mother abandoned them to him. Tuya shook off the uneasy feeling that came over him before he ran after his mother. His siblings already running right in front of him. It was just a little different than usual. Nothing to worry about. Tuya sat up as he heard the garage door open. A happy smile lit up the little boy's face when he saw his father enter the house, car seat in hand. He removed his scarf with one hand and took off his shoes with a brief movement of his foot, leaving them lying on the carpet leading to the garage. He walked through the house at a brisk pace, his eyes darting back and forth between the pod and where he was stepping. Tuya emerged from the darkness of the stairs, nervously fidgeting with his hands behind his back. He swayed back and forth on his feet, waiting for his father to notice him, which he did. "Tuya, you're still up?" He looked slightly tired, but not as tired as his mother. The baby stirred in his car seat. Immediately, his father's full attention turned to the little creature with cheeks rosy from the cold. His little gloved fists struck the void in his sleep. Enji smiled. Enji rarely smiled. Tuya felt the corners of his mouth turn downward, his excitement falling like a failed soufflé. He watched his father stop in the hallway to arrange the baby's blanket with surprising delicacy. Enji's blue eyes looked up at his son. His smile lost its sweetness. "You wanted to tell me about your soccer game, right?" The little boy jumped down the stairs, the baby already completely forgotten. "It was super easy," the other team was like. "Quiet. The baby is sleeping." Tuya gave the little thing a slightly irritated look, but obeyed his father anyway. Enji listened patiently as they walked through the house to the wing of the bedrooms. "And then right at the last minute Kenzo shoot me the ball, but as I was at the other end of the field I had to run. And you know when I run I go really fast, so I ran and afterwards dash." His father opened the door adjacent to the parents' bedroom slightly. "This is really interesting, Tuya, but it's past midnight. It's been a long day and I still have to put the baby to bed." Tuya snapped out of his trance and looked around, surprised that they had already reached their destination. Yeah right," stammered Tuya. "I'll tell you all about it tomorrow." His father offered him a little smile. "Good night." He rushed into the room without turning on the light. Tuya watched from the doorway as he removed the baby from his seat and placed him in his crib. His gestures were of infinite delicacy, as if he was afraid to break it by being too abrupt. His back to Tuya, Enji stood up and gazed at the baby for a moment, his glassy looking at something beyond him. Absent-mindedly, Enji brushed back a strand of white hair from the baby's forehead. Then he walked through the door connecting to the parents' room without looking back, assuming, not without reason, that Tuya had already gone to bed. Tuya looked at him as he left the door ajar, his dark eyes automatically returning to the baby. There was something different about it. Tuya wasn't sure how long he stood in the darkness of the sleeping house, watching the baby stir through the bars of his crib. He felt a little angry and disappointed that his father had not listened to him all the way. Yes, but there was something else. He felt uneasy. And also, Tuya licked his dry lips, eyebrows furrowed, trying to put into words what he was feeling. He felt worried. Yes, that's right, the baby was making him a little worried. He wasn't sure why, but it made him worried. Tuya left after a long moment spent scrutinizing the new addition to their family. He wasn't sure he liked it. Life as a baby was downright monotonous. Since I needed to sleep 20 hours a day, the months passed like a foggy dream in which I could not distinguish day from night. Still, when I was awake, I did my best to listen to the surrounding conversations to learn the language. It was more difficult than I expected, but my malleable brain coupled with my adult mind gave me a frightening memorization capacity that bordered on eidetic memory. It took very little effort to remember the conversations around me and replay them in my head when I was alone, allowing me to deconstruct them at my leisure. I focused only on that and had no interest in the toys or stuffed animals that Ray slipped to me, making her somewhat worried about me. I didn't care at all. My goal was to be recognized as a genius and to be much better than Endeavor expected me to be, so that I could be more free in the future. I also had chakra to unlock. I'll deal with that once when keeping my eyes open for more than 3 minutes won't put me in a coma-like state. Speaking of the old fool, I saw him almost more often than Ray. He seemed to make sure his war machine had everything it needed to optimize its development. Could have been cute if he wasn't rubbing his hands together like the second-rate villain in a bad movie. Ray always calmed him down when he acted out of line and, strangely enough, he listened to her. Maybe I was in the period when their marriage had not yet started to fall apart? Now that I thought about it, when did their marriage become hell? I knew it was before Shoto's 5th birthday. My 5th birthday when and if I would get my scar, and also after I was born. Maybe there was a trigger that I was forgetting about, or maybe it had just gotten worse over the years. Anyway, I didn't care. The only person I cared about in that family was Endeavor. He had the wallet and the connections. Money and power, really nothing better. And based on his groupie behavior, I was pretty sure I'd have him wrapped around my finger by the time I was 5. Granted, I would have to struggle a bit and suffer a few setbacks, but I would get there because I had no alternative but success. I refused to be the whiny kid from Canon who runs to tell his problems to the first person who shows a little interest in him. That is, the first person to say hello to him without stuttering. I was and will be better than the Shoto of Canon. I had no reason to doubt it, because it was the one and only reality I allowed to exist. As months passed, I became more and more aware of my surroundings. I even noticed my brothers and sister. Their existence should not have mattered to me under normal circumstances. They were just background characters and I was a top choice, but one piece of information in particular bothered me. Wasn't the Shoto of the Canon supposed to have only one brother and one sister? The third child, the tallest one, the one with red hair, was a little weird. He always kept his distance from the others and preferred to watch me from afar. He looked shy, as if he never knew where to put himself when he set foot in my room. I burped as Ray gently patted my back, rocking me back and forth against her chest. "That's great, baby. You're a big boy." The little girl with the white pigtails hopped around Ray. "Mom, can I take him? Can I? I immediately grabbed Ray's shirt, mentally preparing myself for the battle that would follow. The girl was more like a rabbit on coke than a child. She was always jumping around as if no one had ever taught her how to move other than leaping. She was also very clumsy and spent her time bumping into all the furniture and doors of the house. Ray and the children had only been in my room for 10 minutes and the little girl had already fallen 3 times and had almost broken her glasses 4 times in the same span. If Ray ever let her get close to me, I could only hope that the demons in the afterlife would take pity on me and give me a karma discount on the wheels. Maybe next time. Fumi? The little one stopped jumping and crossed her arms over her chest, looking upset. Her glasses slid to the tip of her nose but miraculously did not fall off. So there exists a button to turn off this little fool. "Okay," she mumbled reluctantly. The white-haired boy who always followed her around watched her before he too crossed his arms over his chest, frowning exaggeratedly. "Tuya, what do you think about holding your brother?" I straightened up almost as quickly as the boy leaning against the wall next to the door. His eyes lowered to me before returning to his mother. I'm not sure that Dash, you always held your siblings each time we came back from the hospital. Tuya looked at his mother imploringly, as if he didn't want to do it, but she didn't flinch. Come on, Tuya. Take him in your arms. I didn't really have an opinion about him. He was a quiet, withdrawn child, but he seemed way more reliable than the pig-tailed threat. I still had my suspicions about him. I remembered the vague theory that Dabi was supposed to be Shoto's second brother, but as long as he didn't do anything to me, I would treat him like any other child who crossed my path, with contempt and disdain. His arms wrapped around my body as he cradled me awkwardly against him. His hesitant eyes went back and forth between Ray and me. He looked as uncomfortable as I was in this baby body. Someone slammed a door in the distance. There was a sound of footsteps as the hall floor creaked under the weight of the new individual. Fuyumi's sulky face lit up. Daddy's home. She ran down the hallway, the boy following like a shadow. Tuya looked very relieved to have an excuse to leave. He pushed me in Ray's arms and almost made me fall. Ray widened her eyes and caught me in time. Tuya, be careful. Sorry, he didn't look sorry. He ran down the hall to see his father. The giant that was our father stepped through the door, nearly knocking his son over. The boy sat up as his father put a hand on his shoulder to steady him. Tuya smiled at him, embarrassed, but Endeavor's attention was already elsewhere. His eyes fell on his wife and then on me. My chubby fingers reached out in his direction. I babbled in the way only babies knew how to do to get attention. The corner of his mouth turned up for a moment so short that I thought I had dreamed it. He sighed before striding across the distance between us. Ray let him carry me willingly. Did you finish early? I didn't know if it was a side effect of his altar, but he gave off a pleasant warmth. I felt his gaze on me as I settled more comfortably into the crook of his elbow. The villains are quiet at the moment. Fuyumi, who hated super mega noting adult talk, slipped between Ray and Endeavor, jumping happily. Dad, you don't know what Shoto did, do you? How you don't know? No, Fuyumi. I don't know. She grabbed his hand and pulled him to the play mat in the corner of the room. There were stuffed animals bigger than me piled up against the wall and a plastic cart as colorful as a rainbow. Ugly, the rainbow. At the request of the terrible child, Endeavor placed me on the carpet in front of a box with geometric shapes. Endeavor sat right behind me, the ghost of his hand on my back, while Ray had taken Natsuo on her lap. My chest puffed up with pride, ready to show my genius to all those mortals who looked at me, Fuyumi, with admiration. Always Fuyumi. Come on, Shosho, here, do it again. I was a little annoyed by the nickname, but I took the plastic forms she handed me anyway. I had a reputation as a genius to create, and nothing was better than the present to get started. I passed each of the shapes she handed me with ease through the corresponding holes. Fuyumi even turned the box upside down to show that I was thinking things through and not just doing a silly imitation of what she had shown me earlier. Did you see that? Shosho is like super smart. I looked up at Endeavor, whose head was just above mine. His blue eyes met mine. They had a strange glow to them. He took the box, emptied it, and turned it to a new position. Start over, I gladly complied with his requests. He turned the box 3 more times to test me while, in the background, the girl clapped like a retard. My eyes stumbled to the open door and I saw Tuya's back as he slipped out without a word. Again, my attention returned to the game at the urging of Endeavor. Hey! I said I took the thimble. Tuya gave Fuyumi a sidelong glance as he finished preparing the game board. Why are you upset? I always take the car. I say this in case you decide to take the dice because it's the best, Tuya snorted. Definitely not. It is, the boy rolled his eyes and said nothing else. He was smart enough to understand that arguing with the demon in residence would not bring him anything but a headache. The more it went on, the more I found that of the 3, Tuya was the most tolerable. He was calm, at least, and a little bit on the weird side, but isn't that the case for all children? Ah, for Natsu and Shosho. Fuyumi rummaged through a cardboard box full of stuffed animals in poor condition. She put in front of me a small pink mouse with a frayed tail. Natsuo got a white rabbit that was missing an eye. Natsu, no, it's not a toy, it's a pawn. The boy, seeing that his sister was going to steal his new comforter, stepped back and hugged his stuffed animal tighter to his chest. Fuyumi tried to take it from him but failed. She sighed, and her eyes turned to me. My mouse was on the starting line. At least Shosho understands when I tell him that it's not a toy. He doesn't understand what you're saying to him. Fuyu, said Tuya, condescending. He's just looking at you, because that's what all babies do. The girl giggled. He totally understands me. Shosho is like super smart. He understands everything we say. Tuya didn't look convinced. Fuyumi continued, you'll see. I'm pretty sure that if I explain him the rules well, he can defeat us all. She explained the game to me with a thoroughness that an 8-year-old girl was not supposed to have. I attributed that to her desire to outdo her brother. I listened carefully because it was my first time playing Monopoly and I was intrigued by the system. It was like a parody of a capitalist society for children. Personally, when I was a child, my hobbies revolved more around horseback riding and water polo. I had a pony once, Flash of Fire, a real winner. Then, as I wanted to start trading and my parents didn't want to lend me money, I sold him to a slaughterhouse. I had been, for a short week, the 13-year-old with the most pocket money in my boarding school. Ah, what memories! Natsuo put a card in his mouth. No, Natsu. These are cards to play with, not to swallow. Fuyumi grabbed the boy and tried to make him spit out the card. Tears welled up in his eyes and he started crying as the girl finally held the card. Triumphant. It looked like it had been half-eaten by a dog. Fuyumi made a disgusted pout as saliva ran down her fingers. She tossed the card aside and wiped her fingers on the carpet. Well, let's just say this place doesn't exist anymore. She grabbed a pencil and made a shaky cross on Rufash. You can't delete boxes like that. Of course I can. Look, I just did it. Tuya got impatient. If you do that, the game doesn't work anymore. Why wouldn't it work? There's still like 100 places to buy. I thought it was admirable how the boy champed at his bit. Fuyumi had enough in her to make Angelina Jolie hate children. The game began. Natsuo sucked his thumb and apart from throwing the dice, he did little else. In addition to managing the bank, Fuyumi had granted herself the right to be his financial advisor. What did you say, Natsu? You want to sell me your Rue de la Paix for $50? Oh well, if you insist. Tuya threw all his bills flat on the tray. Stop stealing Natsu's cards. That's cheating. The girl looked dismayed. She pushed her glasses up on her nose bridge with her ring finger. Me cheating? I would never cheat, contrary to you. Remember last time you cheated when we played the duck game? Tuya grabbed his hair as if he was about to pull it out. I miscounted only once. Once. And that was 2 years ago. Are you going to remind me of that all my life? Ha! See, you cheated. Tuya's shoulders fell back. He stood up. Forget it. I'm going to the bathroom, Fuyumi. A triumphant smile on her lips watched him until he left the living room. She waited a few more seconds before dipping unscrupulously into the bank. Her eyes met mine. What? Is my banker's salary? I blinked. Okay, here's your cut. She handed me a wad of 500s. Don't tell Tutu. Okay? I put the bills in my pile. Kids or not, I'll crush them all. Fuyumi hid her new cash under her skirt. She looked up at the corridor, waited a few seconds. Then she dipped again in the bank. Hey, you're cheating. Fuyumi gasped. She pointed at me with her hand full of money. It was Shosho who told me to do it. Tuya got really angry. Stop it. He doesn't understand anything and he can't even speak. Tuya stormed in, trying to wrestle the money out of her hands. They bickered and knocked over the entire game board. The dice got lost in a dark corner of the shaggy carpet. The housekeeper arrived in a hurry. What's going on here? Why am I hearing all these screams? It's Tuya. He keeps on dash. I stopped paying attention to them when I saw Endeavor enter the living room. He was drying his face with a towel, his hair still wet. Purple bags hung under his eyes. His eyes glided over us, as if he could barely see us, before he went to sit on one of the sofas, blanket in hand. He did this sometimes when he came home from work and had a few hours to spare. As for why he was sleeping in the noisy living room full of whining children rather than his room, I glanced at Narumi. She was still trying to resolve the conflict between the children, surely wanting to ease the tension before Tuya murdered Fuyumi. The poor boy's left hand was shaking. I grabbed the edge of a chair and used it as a crutch to help me stand up. I looked over my shoulder. No one was paying me attention. I breathed in, mentally preparing myself for what was next. That was when it got tricky. I had trained myself to stand up in my crib, but when it came to walking, I moved a shaky leg forward on the carpet. I staggered, fell sideways against the upholstered sofa. I straightened up and forced myself to move another leg forward just as shakily as the first. I had to raise my arms on either side of my body to steady myself, but I managed. Frowning, I set off. One step, rebalance. Second, third. It was a laborious undertaking, but I think I was beginning to understand how it worked. Hey, look at Shosho. Here comes the first obstacle, the coffee table. I knew that if I went underneath and started to crawl, the housekeeper would come and get me in no time, so I would have to take the arduous and dangerous road to reach my goal. The cold floor. I looked up from my feet to see the object of all my efforts. Endeavor was lying on the couch, a khaki blanket casually draped over him. One arm on his pillow supported his head, which was hidden under the blanket. Only his red hair was still visible. My feet left the carpet. I staggered across the floor, my arms flailing in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the housekeeper move forward to catch me, but I managed to stabilize myself without her help. She stopped but remained in direct proximity. My toes twitched. I couldn't grip my toes onto the carpet fibers to keep myself upright, but at least they weren't frozen thanks to the onesie. I walked around the coffee table, swaying like a sailor who had drunk too much. I was not ashamed to hold onto one of the table legs to help me along. The entirety of this undertaking and my difficulty in walking without faltering was, admittedly, a blow to my ego, but as the saying goes, the end justifies the means. Pride washed over me as I saw the couch looming within reach. A little more and I stumbled, the toes of my right foot hitting the ground. Immediately, the back of my foot followed, my ankle and leg being dragged along with the momentum. My eyes widened as I stirred air with my arms. I crashed into the couch with a loud woof, my fists automatically gripping the brown cushions. My body was diagonal from the floor, as if I were a bridge with one of its pillars just collapsed. I had to use all my strength to stand up and hold on my feet again. Even then, the top of my head was not above the seat. I looked up. Endeavor had half lifted the blanket from his face and was scanning me intently. I looked down, intimidated. This guy had a way of looking at you that made you uncomfortable. Focus, Shoto. We won't be frightened by a 30-year-old who needs to take naps. I was evaluating my next course of conduct. If I held onto the armrest and wedged my right foot under the cushion, my feet left the ground. I blinked in surprise as Endeavor pulled me under the blanket beside him. He wrapped his arm around my body and pulled me closer to him, locking me against his chest. He stared at me for a few seconds, silent, before holding me tighter against him. His eyes closed. Don't make a sound or I'll send you straight to the crib. I hated the crib. I knew it, he knew it, everyone in this house knew it. That's a low blow, Endeavor. But since I managed to manipulate you into letting me sleep with you, I consider us even. It took me only 3 seconds against the living heater to fall asleep. There was something inherently comical about seeing Shoto Todoroki, the nearly 7-foot giant with the icy stare and iron shoulders, wearing a striped birthday hat with tassels. The plastic wire, which ran from under his chin to the clevis, was so tight against his jaw that it almost went into his skin. It looked like it was going to exploded. I put my hands over my mouth, unable to hold back the laughter that escaped me. Enji looked annoyed as hell. Ray, this is the third one that breaks. Do I really have to wear this? Ray, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, smiled humorously as she puts on her earrings. Of course you have to wear it. They exchanged glances through the mirror. At least wear it for the pictures. Endeavor took off the hat and twirled it between his fingers. He had a long face. His eyes lifted to me. Sit in the baby carrier on the bed. Don't laugh, I laughed louder. He looked even more annoyed than before. Well, look who is having a good day. Ray finally came out of the bathroom. She was wearing a white sweater dress and had curled her hair. Endeavor stood up and ran a hand down her back. pulling her to him. She laughed, a little surprised. "You're beautiful today." He leaned toward her before stopping, red-faced, and glanced at me. "Don't be shy. Shoto won't remember anything until he's at least 4 years old." Enji kissed Rei's cheek before stepping back, his face once again as calm as a lake. "This brat is clever, Rei. He understands everything we say." Rei looked amused. "Fuyumi says the same thing." Someone knocked on the bedroom door. "Todoroki-sama? We have finished the preparations. You can come to the living room." Enji went to open the door, but Rei stopped him with one hand. "Take Shoto instead. Don't you want to take him?" Rei grabbed a tube of lipstick. "Didn't you notice? He's a real daddy's boy." I glared at Rei. "Me? Daddy's boy? This woman is crazy. He's just a little clingy dash. Hey, but that doesn't mean that he prefers me over you." Rei smiles indulgently. "I was Tuya's, Fuyumi's and Natsuo's favorite for the first 3 years of their lives. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about when I tell you that you're his favorite." Enji frowned, arms crossed on his chest. Rei had taken a mirror out of her pocket, and she was applying the final touches to her makeup. "Why only the first 3 years? Because that's usually the age around which they learn that you're a hero, and after that they become miniature versions of you for a while anyway. But I feel like with Shoto it's going to last." Enji looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. He remained silent for a long time, his face devoid of expression but his eyes shining. He seemed not to know how to react to what Rei had told him, and I knew why. Enji may have been my favorite, but I was not his. He looked at me differently from his other children, and not exactly as a father should. He seemed to me more like a collector with a particularly rare piece than a father fond of his youngest child. But it didn't matter. Thanks to Rei's remarks, I could see that Enji was still not quite sure what to do with me. He was hesitating, and it was this hesitation that I intended to exploit today. If I played my cards right, I might even be able to get him to fold in front of me in the near future. "That's it. I'm done." Rei zipped up her makeup bag and opened the door. Enji pulled me out of the carrier and cradled me against his chest, one hand under my buttocks. My fists automatically grabbed his shirt. I know he's strong, but this guy always holds me so sloppily that I feel like I'm going to fall over as soon as he takes a step. I almost forgot. Rei ran to the coffee table and retrieved a miniature version of the birthday hat Enji was wearing. She snagged it on me before stepping back, her lips pressed together as she tried to contain her joyful smile. "You guys are so cute." Enji tried to go around her, but Rei gently pushed him back with a hand on his chest. She took out a camera from I don't know where and shook it in front of his eyes. "I'll just take a few and we'll be on our way," Enji sighed, and I knew he was already tired of the day ahead. My irritation at wearing the colored hat diminished somewhat when I saw his scowling face. His eyes lowered to mine. Click, click. "There. Perfect." After the long and terrible hours spent in the master room, it was finally time to get out. I couldn't help but get excited thinking about what was next. "Tell me it's a chocolate cake. Please, I need something other than this damn carrot puree." "Todoroki-sama," greeted one of the maids. A cacophony of voices joined the first one. "Todoroki-sama." A flock of maids stood on either side of the long hallway that led us to the living room. They all had white aprons and bonnets tied with a banded cord under their chins. They bowed when we passed in front of them. I felt like some royalty. "Don't you think you overdid it for the staff?" Rei swept his remarks aside with a wave of her hand. "The first birthday comes once in a lifetime. I want Shoto to remember it forever. He's a kid. He won't remember anything. Wasn't it you who told me earlier that he was smarter than average?" Enji backed down without a word. If Fuyumi was stubborn, it was because Rei was even more so. The housekeeper, a hand on the mahogany door handle of the living room, smiled as she saw us arrive. "What a beautiful picture you are making." She opened the door without further ado. Light flooded the dark hallway. I fluttered my eyes, dazzled by the clarity of the room. The curtains were drawn, clearing the view of a blue sky and the garden covered with still falling snow. There were streamers hanging from the lampshade, flashing strings of lights hanging from the ceiling to the walls, and balloons placed all over the room to the point where it was hard to see your shoes. Rei looked at me with wolfish attention, her smile widening as I surveyed the place. She stood on her toes and whispered loudly in Enji's ear. "I think he likes it." Enji stepped into the living room, the sea of balloons splitting in half in front of him before closing in his path. The living room had been rearranged for the occasion. The leather sofas gathered around a series of low tables loaded with snacks. There were petit fours, canapes, small burgers, and some other products that I suspected to be only for Enji and Ray. I felt weird. Usually all of my birthdays were the tidy kind with a mountain of guests I'd never seen before in my life. But this one, standing behind the tables were Tuya, Fuyumi, and Natsuo. The former was unbuttoning his tie, disgruntled, while Fuyumi was bouncing happily, her little pink muslin skirt inflating and deflating like a balloon. Natsuo sat on the floor, oblivious to the outside world, his face smeared with ketchup and his hands full of crumbled meat. "Show, happy birthday, grumbled Tuya. Natsuo looked at his brother and sister with a stupid look before turning to me. He at least had the decency to swallow what was in his mouth before saying, "Happy birthday." Enji placed me on the carpet, the only place in the room that wasn't cluttered with balloons. I walked over to the coffee table, already salivating at the thought of stuffing my face like a donkey. What? I was a baby, and babies never did anything but poop and eat. Preferably the other way around. I felt Tuya's gaze on me as often recently. I didn't know what was wrong with him, but the more it went on, the weirder I found him. He had developed the annoying habit of scrutinizing me whenever I made the slightest move, the same way a cat would scrutinize a mouse it was about to kill. I think he was still upset about the monopoly. It had been several weeks ago, but I couldn't think of anything else that would justify his sudden obsession with me. My hands clutched the edge of the coffee table as I contemplated the array of choices. What to start with, sweet, salted, or maybe a little juice? Oh well. I grabbed everything I could get my hands on, eating everything I could as fast as I could. "Don't forget to chew," Enji admonished me. I felt like a black hole whose one and only mission was to devour everything it could get its hands on. Everything was beautiful, everything smelled good, everything made me hungry, and I wanted it all. I barely looked up to see that Natsuo, Fuyumi, and Tuya had also moved closer to the table and were eating in silence. Other than the click-click and the sound of our regular chewing, there was no noise in the living room. Tuya had lost his crumpled look a bit and was eating mini pizzas, dipping them in sauce here and there. Fuyumi drank can after can of Coke, side-eyeing Ray from time to time to see if she would stop her. Natsuo had put his brain on pause and gobbled up everything he could get his hands on without bothering to analyze what it was. I watched those three kids stuff themselves as if they had never had enough to eat in their lives, feeling a strange connection to them. They were all a little weird in their own way, but I guess I didn't hate them. Or maybe not too much. Is this what a functional family is supposed to look like? When I was in the before, I shook off the bad thoughts, preferring to finish my mini burger before sitting down on the floor, satiated. "Natsu, you got it all over yourself," Ray scolded him. She began to rub his face with a wet wipe. He didn't seem to like it. "Shoto, look at me." Enji crouched down next to me. He pulled me to him before dusting off my crumb-covered shirt. I grabbed a new burger and chewed it gently as he continued to clean me up. He squinted but said nothing. "Actually, I don't think I'm very hungry anymore." I looked at the hamburger, then at Enji, then at the hamburger again. I lifted the barely touched sandwich in front of his face. I shook it in front of his mouth. He looked at me, looked at the sandwich, then sighed. I didn't even have time to blink before he had swallowed the whole thing. In point one bite, Enji chewed diligently and swallowed the whole sandwich before looking back at me. He frowned. "Don't look at me like that." He closed my open mouth with his finger. The rest of the afternoon went on much the same. We ate, we played, we ate some more. Ray finally took Natsuo away from the food to prevent him from inducing a coma. He cried loudly. Finally came the part one was least looking forward to, the gifts. There were some in a small pile wrapped in shiny paper on my right. Since Ray had decided to play paparazzi, Enji was in charge of opening my presents in case I didn't manage it. Baby hands and all that stuff. Click, click. "You can start." I couldn't even bring myself to look surprised after unwrapping my third stuffed animal of the day. There were cars, teddy bears, more cars. Fuyumi gave me 2 dolls that she seemed more excited to play with than me. I suspected that she had used the family money to make a gift for herself and that she was using me as a way to make her products legal in front of the police, aka Ray. I put them on the stack of things I planned to burn the day I activated my altar. Another present arrived, round and heavier than the others. It was shaped like an apple, but wrapped in duct tape and toilet paper. I looked around the room hesitantly. Tuya's eyes were shining. It's mine. Go ahead, Shosho. Open it. My nails couldn't even find a hook on the tape. Enji grabbed the present and opened it for me. I blinked. Slowly. Fuyumi even stopped hopping, which was quite a feat. Rock? Ray lowered her camera and turned to her eldest son. Tuya, didn't you spend the money that we gave you? He shrugged. I lost it, but there was something in his eyes that told me he was lying. He stared at me. His chin was slightly raised, as if he expected a reaction that didn't come. Does he expect me to cry? His features hardened. Pretending to be caught by the purple ribbon on my lap, I looked away. Ray raised her camera in front of her eyes, stood still for a moment, and then lowered it again. Next gift, there were many more gifts, each more boring than the last, but none came close to Tuya and his rock. The atmosphere had become strange, but nobody said anything. I suspected that Enji didn't care and didn't even bother to look at the presents, mechanically opening those I'd given him. I had become one of those third-world kids who worked on the assembly line for so long that they lost their taste for life. That's from Dad, said Ray. It was a comic book of a girl in a dress. Princess Sarah. I looked up at Enji. He looked at the gift as if he had discovered it at the same time I had. He glanced at Ray before returning to me. Don't look at me like that, I blinked. I'll buy you a motorcycle when you're older, Enji. Plastic, Ray. A plastic motorcycle. And finally, the last present. I saw the housekeepers putting some delicious chocolate cake on the dining table and wanted to get it done. If the stone was heavy, it was nothing in comparison to the triangle that was wrapped in silk. A golden bow delicately wrapped it, giving it the look of an obese L. I can't remember who it is from, said Ray. I pulled the ribbon and got rid of the fabric in no time. Realistic for a toy. It had a cool feel to it and even had the appearance of metal. It shone like someone had just lubricated it. Picking it up with difficulty, I took the gun in both hands. The gun wobbled, aimed at Ray and Fuyumi. There is a safety catch, too. I slid my thumb over the black projection and a small click was heard in the room. An Enji. Ray stuttered. I wonder if a red flag comes out of the barrel when the trigger is pulled? I did not have the time to try it out because Enji snatched the gun right out of my hand. With an expert thumb, he opened the cylinder. There were no cartridges in it. He fumbled with the heap of cloth at my feet and pulled out a clear bag filled with bullets. I watched him in bewilderment, unable to understand what was going on. Hold on, it's a real one? Enji, you told me it would stop. Gun and bullets in hand, he jumped to his feet. He looked downright furious. I will call her. He hurried out of the living room. Ray looked shaken. Like a shadow, Fuyumi slipped next to me. She pulled one of her dolls out of the pile of rubble and stroked the synthetic hair with the tips of her fingers. Don't worry, Shosho. They're not angry with you. It's just that they don't like it when Granny gives us gifts. She paused for a moment and had a look at her doll. She must not like what she saw because she pinned the blonde hair back. She gave me a great knife once. But then Mom and Dad took it and I never got it back. Wait. What? Tuya and Natsuo didn't look too shocked either. Enji returned a few minutes later, but without the weapon. Ray waited for him to talk, but when he didn't, she decided to clap to get our attention. Now, who would like to have a piece of cake? I sat in the chair, feet flailing, cake under my nose. As the Todoroki family finished singing Happy Birthday, I mentally prepared for the first step of my special puppet plan. I looked up at Endeavor, who was standing behind Ray, singing without really putting his heart into it. He looked as annoyed as he was bored. Everyone was applauding, and I took the opportunity to reach out and shake my chubby little fingers at him. He pretended to ignore me, puffing up my cheeks. I insisted. Ray leaned towards him. Make an effort, Enji. It's his birthday. He hesitated in a dilemma. Once I give you the coup de grace, You will be the one who chases me around and wants my attention. He scooped me up. I lay my small hands on his face, clumsily feeling his beard. His eyes never left mine as he watched me in silence. His mouth parted in uncertainty. I knew exactly what was going through his mind. He didn't know whether to see me as his son or his weapon. Since I didn't want him to come to a conclusion on his own, I dropped my bomb. I love you, Dad. He flinched, startled, and I did my best to hug his giant neck, pressing my ear to his chest. His heart was beating fast. That's right, creepy endeavor. You thought I was your weapon? Give me a break, you're just my tool. I'll wear you down until you're nothing. Oh my God, Rei exclaimed. She clapped her hands. Did we hear that right? Has Shoto just spoken his first words? She screamed like it was the most amazing thing in the world. To my amazement, Enji put another hand under my little legs to hold me better. He swayed back and forth and rocked me gently against his chest. Click, click. Only a few seconds of this circus made my thoughts foggy. I hadn't taken a nap today. I blinked one last time. I caught the image of Tuya spilling the cake on the floor. No one noticed. He slipped away without anyone noticing. Tuya jumped up and down in his seat, a huge smile on his face. He held his golden trophy in both hands and looked at it every now and then to make sure it hadn't flown away in the meantime. The satisfaction radiating from his entire body was palpable. Tutu, I forgot how you scored that last goal. Could you tell me again? Fuyumi was a clever child. She understood how much all of this meant to Tuya, the victory, the trophy, but especially the fact that the whole family had come to see it, and she didn't hesitate to ask for more so that he would have a good excuse to repeat himself. For the 5th time since we'd left the stadium, Tuya told us the grandiose story of how he'd saved the game. With each repetition, the situation became more desperate, his opponents more caricatured, and his personal victory more decisive. He loved being the center of attention, loved the way Natsuo looked at him, his eyes wide with admiration, loved the fact that his father, the youngest hero in history to break into the top 5, had come to watch him play between patrols, and that he could show off in front of all his friends. For the first time in a long time, Tuya looked truly happy. Personally, I wasn't too happy about being woken up at the crack of dawn on a Sunday to watch a bunch of uncoordinated kids running around a muddy stadium, but whatever. Tuya had been off my back ever since he'd heard his team had been selected for the regional finals, and now he was paying as much attention to me as to a dead plant. I wasn't complaining, on the contrary. It was better than being scrutinized day and night, as if he were thinking of the best way to make me disappear without a trace. As I'd suspected, his behavior in the past had only been bad. He'd just had a bit of an early onset teenage crisis, but nothing to get upset about. Rei listened patiently as he finished speaking, never picking up on any of the inconsistencies in his story. What? When all seemed lost, Enji hadn't really fell from the sky to tell Tuya that as a hero, he had to defeat his enemies or the earth would be lost. Am I dreaming or are the traffic jams not moving? She murmured in a low voice. She leaned forward and banged on the tinted window that separated us from the driver. He lowered the window. Excuse me, why aren't we moving? A pile up, Mrs. Todoroki. Half the road is blocked. I'm afraid we're going to be here for a while. Rei frowned. Thank you very much. She sank back into her seat as the driver rolled up the window. 2 benches faced each other in the back. Under the window were Tuya and Fuyumi, and with their backs to the trunk were Rei, Natsuo, and I in that exact order. Each of the children was quiet for the moment. Fuyumi was playing with dolls. Tuya was idealizing the last hours of his life a bit more, and Natsuo was doing what weird children of his age did. But Rei knew very well that 4 children in a small room for several hours could only lead to the death of one of them at the hands of the others. I was confident that I would emerge victorious as long as Tuya didn't attack me at the first opportunity. This boy had been training with Enji for a while and knew how to hit where it hurts. Fuyumi turned sharply to Rei. Mommy, I'm hungry. Rei reached into her purse. I think I have a muesli bar somewhere. A sudden movement behind the tinted glass caught my attention. A woman with a baby in her hand was running past our car, against the flow of traffic. What the? There was a muffled scream. Then, suddenly, Dozens and dozens of people ran out of their cars and onto the bridge. "Mom, what's going on?" Even Tuya was silent. We watched stunned as a new wave of people fled at breakneck speed. "Stay where you are." Ray opened the car door and stepped out. Screams of terror washed over us like a tsunami. I froze, my eyes wide open. Ray, her face unusually calm, slipped back into the car. She unbuckled my seatbelt and held me close to her. "Take off your seatbelts." The three children gave in without flinching. Natsuo burst into tears. Ray smiled and leaned over to wipe the tears from his cheeks with her thumb. "Hey, why are you crying?" The boy hiccuped, his pacifier in his mouth. "It's all right, okay? It's just a little game." Ahead of us, to the right, a car burst into flames. The alarms of the two surrounding cars went off immediately. "You trust Mommy, don't you?" He nodded, his eyes shining. Ray turned to Tuya. "I want you to keep an eye on your brother, okay?" The boy nodded, suddenly serious. "Fuyumi, don't let go off my hand." Ray tried to get up, but Natsuo pulled at her sleeve and refused to let go. Outside, our driver cast panicked glances over his shoulder. "Ms. Todoroki, we have to go." "I'm right here, Natsuo, okay? I'm not going anywhere." But the boy refused to let go. Ray's lips tightened until they turned white. Looking at me, she finally put me back on the seat. All right. She took Natsuo in her arms and smiled at me reassuringly. There was a crackling sound outside, as if someone was connecting a microphone to a loudspeaker. "You're going with Mr. Hibami, Shoto, won't you?" "I'll be right beside you, I promise." I nodded. "Tuya, don't let Shoto out of your sight." "Understood." She got out of the car, Fuyumi and Tuya behind her. The driver took me in his arms and hardly looked at me. His big eyes were fixed on the earth golem blocking the exit of the bridge. "We're leaving." The crossing was difficult because everyone had left their cars and was trying to get away from the giant, hoping to get back on the other side of the bridge. "Mic test, 1 2 1 2." I looked over the driver's shoulder. A man in a plumber's outfit, a yellow hard hat on his head, was standing on the roof of an abandoned van, coughing into the microphone. "Does this thing work?" He tapped on it. "Your attention, please." A man, briefcase in hand, bumped into Fuyumi as he ran. "Hey!" Ray steadied Fuyumi and stopped in the middle of the road. We were halfway across the bridge. People were running all around us, slaloming between the cars, creating a crowd in the middle of the bridge. Tuya was pushing and shoving anyone who, in their rush, got too close to our group. People were barely reacting, their faces pale, their mouths half open, their heads half turned toward the villain with the microphone. "We're looking for a..." People started screaming hysterically. As we started walking again, Ray stopped us with a hand. People were fighting in the middle of the bridge, pushing and shoving, some stepping on the fallen ones. The microphone crackled. The woman with the baby was pushed into a corner by men and women trying to escape, her child crying. The villain screamed, "There's a bomb on the bridge, and if you don't do as we say, we'll blow it up." Everyone froze. Most of the crowd, huddled between 24x4s in the middle of the bridge, stopped pushing forward. Ray straightened up, eyes wide, jaw set. I could feel the panic spreading. Calm down. There's nothing telling you that it's true. For all you know, they're just trying to scare us so they can get everyone's watches and jewelry. If you do as we say, no one will get hurt." There was a deadly silence. Somewhere behind us, an old woman fainted. The villain unfolded a yellowed piece of paper from his pocket. "We're looking for a boy." He looked down at the paper, with red hair that's turning white, and in soccer gear, apparently. Tuya opened his eyes wide. Ray, with her back to the group in the middle of the deck, pressed Tuya against her, pulled off her scarf and wrapped it around his face and hair like a baklava. We were half hidden behind an unoccupied hearse. From where he stood, the villain couldn't see him. He crumpled the paper in his hand and put it back in his pocket. "Hand him over and you'll be safe." He wedged the microphone between his ear and shoulder and began to set his watch, a high-pitched beep echoing through the speakers. "I wouldn't advise fleeing to the other side of the bridge. Our colleagues over there are much less friendly than we are." And immediately, a howl ripped through the air. A gust of wind came up, sweeping all the dust off the bridge in its path. Everyone ducked, covering their faces for protection. The driver's legs trembled. Heart pounding, I squinted to see more clearly. A golem, larger and more massive than the first, stood on the other side of the bridge. It had horns that made it look like a demon, and moss covered the rocks that made up its body. He was pounding his chest with his fists, like a gorilla trying to scare off a rival. Even from here, I could see his vicious little red eyes glowing unnaturally. He screamed again, cementing the terror in our hearts. A new, louder explosion swept across the deck. The villain picked up his microphone. "You have 10 minutes to deliver him." The beep of his watch, a sign of the countdown, echoed to the other end of the bridge. There was a pause, a second in which no one dared move. The air was silent, time frozen. I met Ray's gaze, then Tuya's. The boy opened his mouth, and then a scream broke the silence. "It's him! It's him! It's him!" I turned my eyes to the voice to my left, far from the center of the bridge. It was the old woman from earlier, the one who had apparently fainted, who had screamed. Her eyes were yellow, slit like a cat's, and she was standing with a walker. Took me a few seconds to realize that she was pointing at me. The driver was shaking. He backed up and crashed into a car, as if the old woman's gaze had penetrated him. I could feel the wetness of his skin against mine. The villain with the microphone picked at his ear with his little finger. Indifferent. My throat was dry, my breath short. Blood pounded at my ears like a second heart. Ray hissed through her teeth. "Hibami, come back at once." People were watching us, looking at me. Everyone was. "He's here." There was a commotion on the bridge. The crowd was thinning. They were coming towards me. "Hibami, I don't," he stammered. Ray looked around angrily. Then, without warning, she let go of Fuyumi's hand and ran towards us. Her free hand wrapped around me and pulled me into the safety of her arms. But it was as if the driver had become a statue and his fingers had become rocks on my body. Ray pulled, and I tried to stand up against him and move towards her. With wild eyes, the driver looked at the crowd and the golems and the crowd with an expression of pure terror. Ray slapped him. The slap reverberated across the deck like a general electric shock. All those who had been frozen began to move again, slowly at first like zombies. A clamor, at first a whisper, rose from the hard core of the crowd. Hibami finally let go of me and Ray pulled me to her. Natsuo looked at me, his lip trembling, clinging to Ray as if he wanted to melt into her and hide inside her. Ray ran to the middle of the bridge, away from the villains. Fuyumi clung to her skirt to her left and Tuya, at my side, ran at her pace. One man held out his hesitant fingers in our direction. His terrified eyes focused on me. Tuya rammed into him like a bulldozer, knocking him to the ground. The people closest to the villains woke up, some even running after us. "Stop her!" The people in the middle of the bridge watched us pass as if in a dream, hesitant to move forward, confused as to what to do. I saw our reflection in the glasses of a curly-haired passerby. Ray was crossing like a fury, for children clinging to her, a stern expression on her face. People ran after us. Ray slipped between the 24x4s and kept running. Her heart pounded against my ear. Then I saw a tall man, half hidden at the end of the 4x4. His complexion was waxy, his lips parted, and he held a baseball bat in one clenched hand. He squeezed it, raised it slightly, murmured in a low voice, and hid it behind his thigh. He met my eyes. I saw guilt flash in his eyes. I opened my mouth. "M.O." And suddenly, Ray stumbled. The whole world shook. I barely had time to open my eyes before my skull hit the warm asphalt. Ray's arm released me. I rolled onto my side, thrown by the force of the impact. A searing pain, like a clap of thunder, erupted from my shoulder. I moaned in pain and tried to hold my arm to my body. A wave of heat swept through my mind, blurring my vision. For a second, the whole world lost its colors and shapes. I blinked frantically, forcing the pain to fade. Shit. Above me was a sky of metal tubes. Took me a few seconds too long to realize that I'd rolled under a car. My eyes went back to the road. Rei was hugging Natsuo, who was sitting on the ground with a purple ankle. Fuyumi was crying next to her. Tuya, his face dripping with sweat, threatened to roast anyone who came too close, fire burning in his hands. The people took a step back, then two, cautious but not afraid. Tuya wouldn't hurt them. Tuya was just a child. Rei let out a heartbreaking scream. Shoto, they didn't see me. No one saw me. I looked at Rei like a wounded animal, at the rest of my brothers and sisters, at the crowd that was closing in on them like a jaw. If I got out of here, I knew something terrible would happen. Clutching my arm to my body, I crawled under the car to get away. Then I heard a scream, different from the others' terror. I stopped, unable to help myself, and looked over my shoulder. Tuya was standing over a man with a charred arm, panting, his left hand shaking. The crowd retreated. The burnt man continued to scream. Tuya continued to stare at the man, a strange gleam in his eyes. Then he blinked, as if waking from a dream. His eyes swept over the watchful crowd at a respectable distance. He raised his hand again, flames blazing from his fingertips, threatening anyone who approached. The crowd kept their distance, but a clamor rose. Tuya backed away slowly, watching the two-part of crowd that surrounded them between the 4x4s. Then he met my gaze. He froze, one hand on Natsuo's wrist, the other on Rei's shoulder. Then a hand closed around my ankle. So this is where you've been hiding, you brat? My blood ran cold. The man laughed and violently dragged me away. My knees rubbed against the ground, tiny pebbles sinking into my bloody flesh. Helplessly, I reached for Tuya, my mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Help me. He blinked. Slowly, his eyes went to our family and the crowd around him. He looked at me one last time. Then he swung Natsuo onto his back, took Fuyumi's hand and forced Rei to get up and follow him. He left without looking back. The sun dazzled me. I blinked, black spots dancing in my vision. Lying on my back, legs in the air, I came face to face with the humanoid version of the cat of the Cheshire. His yellow eyes, slit like the pupils of a cat, swept me up and down. His face broke into a huge, sharp-toothed grin. He watched me as if wondering if he was going to devour me. Looks right. His smile widened. Hello, Shoto Todoroki. Would you be so kind as to follow us without any fuss? My eyes wandered over the villains standing in a half-circle behind him. They had knives, guns, and I think blood even stained the pants of one of them. Their small group opened up, and a stocky, greasy-haired man stepped among them. Some moved away from him in disgust. Others patted him on the back and sneered. Most were indifferent. Did you do it again, Taichi? You're a damn pig. How old this time? 14? 13? Less? The greasy-haired man didn't answer, but he looked proud. He zipped up his pants. My eyes dropped. Far behind them, half hidden behind the tire of a white van, I saw a hand. A child's hand. My throat grew as dry as the desert. If you resist, we'll blow up the bridge and everyone on it. Took me a few more seconds to realize that the Cheshire Cat was still talking. The tar was hot on my neck and I felt a sudden retching sensation. The cat was miming a dive with his 2 fingers. What do you think? Shall we go? I sat up on my elbows and opened my mouth, and threw up in his face. The cat howled in disgust and took a few steps back. You son of a bitch! I heard laughter. Nobody helped him. I stood up, clutching my wounded arm to my chest, and ran like hell. The smell of vomit and the sour taste in my mouth made me gag again. I bit my fist to keep from thinking about it. Where the hell are you going? Get back here, or I'll break your knees. I slalomed between the cars and returned to the last place I'd seen Rei and our family. Panting, my heart pounding, I scanned the area. There was no one there but the man with the burned arm, lying face down. He had stopped moving. My eyes darted from side to side, trying to catch a glimpse of a tuft of white hair or a lock of red hair hidden somewhere, waiting for me, ready to protect me. He went under the car. I started running again, jaw clenched, blood pulsing at my temples. This time, if my vision was blurry, It wasn't from hitting my head too hard. There was another scream, this time one of hysteria. We've got to catch him. The countdown. Shit, he's heading for the middle of the bridge. The explosives. I freaking know. I threw myself under a car, tearing the skin off my knees, crawling to get to the other side. Just then, a hand shot out and lifted me by the collar of my shirt. Where did you? I slammed my head against the man's and gave him a headbutt. Anticipating what I was about to do, the man stepped back. In a fit of panic, I sank my teeth into his nose and pulled with all my might. He screamed and hit me with his free fist. I could taste his blood in my mouth. His fist slammed into my ear, knocking me off balance. My vision blurred. I pulled harder. He released me and I crashed heavily to the ground. My arm shot out and I groaned in pain. I forced myself up on wobbly legs. The man on his knees held his bloody nose in both hands and screamed. He's attracting the others. A piece of something was in my mouth. I spat it out, not daring to look at what it was. Then I ran again. I passed an empty minibus and looked over my shoulder. The other men were huddled around the one on the ground, murmuring in low voices. Some were watching me run. No one chased me. I ran across the deserted bridge, the sound of my panting filling my ears. The sun saturated the cars and windows in orange and red, as if the world was on fire. I felt like I was moving forward in a dream. I stumbled and fell again. Now there was nothing but silence. No one. I tried to stand up, but I was staggering. I gave myself a few seconds to catch my breath. I'm on my own. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled and wiped my eyes dry. I wondered what I was doing, why I was running. There had to be villains on the other side too, right? If I kept running, I'd run right into them. But if I stayed in the middle of the bridge, I would take the full force of the bomb. Maybe the explosives were a bluff. And then the bridge sprang. There was a thud, as if a storm had just erupted in the sky. Cracks spread like cobwebs along the floor, cracking the cement and crumbling the ground. My eyes widened as I ran for the metal railing. Behind me, the ground opened up, and the van rushed in as if it had been sucked in. The ground lost its consistency under my shoes, bending toward the hole to become one with it. A red car in front of me rolled backwards, tires screeching against the ground. I swerved sharply, a hair's breadth from being hit. The bridge buckled and began to lean toward the hole. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to run sideways to the railing I wanted to reach. A line of cars falling backwards and crashing into each other, preventing me from reaching it. Then I heard the sound of shattering glass and clanging metal. I looked up at the front of the bridge. A badly parked motorcycle was speeding backwards, hitting car after car, but continuing on towards the hole. I ran to the left, slaloming between two cars that were also going backwards. Far above my head, I saw the metal cables on the left side of the bridge give way. The bridge rumbled, as if trying to resist the pull that was trying to bring it down. The floor broke horizontally, the part of the bridge I was on bending dangerously toward 90 degrees. I blinked and saw myself at the bottom of the valley, buried in the middle of a car graveyard. Terrified, I started running again. All around me, cars were rolling backwards like falling snow, tires screeching and cross lights on. I felt like I was running through an unreal world, a world that was doing everything it could to push me backwards and take me down with it. The bridge continued to bend, the metal groaning. Metal rods sticking out of the concrete represented the border between life and death, stability and the whole. Viken. Just then, the motorcycle slid between two cars, blocking my path. I didn't even have time to realize what was happening. The bike reared up and rolled back on one wheel. The rear wheel collided head-on with my forehead. My head spun around, and I thought my neck was going to snap. My teeth chattered with a horrible sound and my neck jerked back. My eyes became a narrow slit. I saw the sun, high in the sky, lighting up the world as if to blind us all. The clouds turned gray, then black, but the sun was as white as ever. I raised my hand to the sky as if to catch the light and take it with me. Then a shadow, like a supernova, split the skies toward me. My mouth fell open, but I could not speak. My eyes closed, Then two mighty arms wrapped around me. My fall stopped, and the man lifted us into the air. But my relief was so great that I would have cried if I could have. He held me tighter and spoke in a low voice, but I couldn't hear him. But I had no trouble guessing who it was. After all, there was only one person who smelled like the sun itself. Shoto Todoroki. Train me, I had made a mistake. I had wrongly believed that this world was the same one I had seen in the anime. But here, the villains didn't monologue for hours, giving the heroes time to save you. They didn't fight for some noble and obscure cause in which you could find some semblance of truth. No, the villains of this world, tangible beings, people like me, made of flesh and blood and conscience, were born with power, and they decided to use it to do whatever they wanted, to hell with the consequences. The villains of this world had chosen to live easy because they could live easy. I too wanted to live life in easy mode. Dad, he's barely 3 years old. You're not really going to dash? Enji raised his hand to silence Tuya. His blue eyes never left my own. It will be difficult, Shoto. There will be no mercy for you. I knew I was lazy. In my life before and in this one, I was a privileged child, born with a silver spoon in my mouth. But unlike the before, there might not be enough greenbacks on this planet to protect me if someone with power wanted me dead. I had money, but I was not powerful. And if you have no power, you are nothing in this world. That's what the medics had said about the dead-eyed girl on the bridge. A fate worse than death. I don't want you to spare me any pain, suffering to become powerful, or suffering at the hands of the more powerful. What a dilemma. Why? I paused, my eyes landing on Tuya before returning to Enji. If I told him that I did not trust the boy, he would not understand. He would call me a liar if I explained he purposely left me on the bridge. But I also knew that he wouldn't train me unless I explicitly told him why I wanted to. For there are worse things than death. A series of emotions flashed across Enji's face. For a brief moment, his shoulders slumped and his face grew an extra meter in length. He looked like he was in pain. I blinked. His eyes were icy again, his face impervious like a statue. He was the strong, powerful man whose mere presence had terrified the villains that day. Enji nodded. If you complain, you leave. If you are reluctant to do an exercise, you leave. If you cry, you leave. I expected no less from my father. The training was brutal. For the first couple of days, it was so hard to get out of bed that I had to crawl to the bathroom. My muscles were still hot and sore, and I needed a nap after each morning session. But I felt great. I felt good knowing that with each new bruise, each new punch, each new day that passed, I was one step closer to my goal. Enji was a brilliant teacher. His instructions were clear and precise, and there was never a waste of energy in unnecessary talk. He gave the orders, and Tuya and I did the work. In the beginning, the only thing I did was physical conditioning. Even when he was not around, Enji gave us exercises to do. He would provide us with handouts with the proper way to warm up and the type and intensity of the exercises that were to be done. At that point, my life was all about running, run around the house, run to the hill in the woods, run around the house again. When you're tired, you go treadmilling until you can't feel your legs. Tuya, on the other hand, had to split his time equally between altar training and hand-to-hand, and on top of that, school. I spent my mornings training and memorizing the basic katas that Enji had shown me. He said that I was bound to grow as much as he did, and that knowing how to use my legs well would give me a great advantage over those I fought. It took me a moment to realize that when he spoke to me, unlike Tuya, he never said that I had to learn this or that to defend myself against villains. He said that I had to defend myself against others. From noon until early afternoon, I ate and slept. I slept a lot. Eating consisted of devouring copious meals prepared by the housekeeper, following Enji's detailed dietary instructions. I began to wonder where he had acquired such knowledge, whether it was martial arts, nutrition, or the multitude of other strange and very useful information he possessed. I saw heroes as a bunch of useless people with more or less dubious knowledge in a variety of subjects, but Enji was not like that. Enji knew what to do, how to do it, and why to do it. Sometimes I felt like a soldier who was training for war. Rei disliked that. She said I was too young, too small, too weak to start training. Enji told her over and over again that I had come to him, that it was my decision, but she didn't want to listen to him. She had every excuse in the world for my quitting. "If you won't let me train with him," I said once, "I'll find a way to train on my own. But I can't promise that I will always return unscathed." After that, Ray left Enji alone. In the afternoon, I pretended to go on an excursion into the huge park that was our garden. There were acres of forest just for us, because Enji liked to keep his private life private. It was there, away from everyone and everything, that I did my chakra training. Most of the time, when I tried to feel my chakra, I ended up falling asleep. For someone my age who needed 13 hours of sleep a day, the line between absolute zen and deep sleep was very thin. The first few weeks were an ordeal. I would sit in the woods in the early afternoon, trying to gain a better understanding of the energy I felt in my stomach. All I had to do was lose control of myself for a second, and the next moment I would wake up, disoriented, as the sun was setting. When I would think of quitting, and I did many times in the first few weeks, I would think of the little girl lying on the deck. She looked dead inside. To me, there was nothing worse than being dead within. If I were her, I would have preferred to be really dead. Chakra was a volatile energy, hot and elusive, like a solid that turned to gas when you tried to grab it. It flowed through my imaginary fingers like water that could not get my hand wet. I started there, trying to make the chakra wet my hand. I had no idea what a chakra was capable of doing to a body. 6 months and 3 days after my first attempt, I finally got it. I was in the living room, sitting on the sofa. I was huddled under half a ton of blankets, waiting for Enji to come home for his usual nap. The comic on the armrest slipped. I tried to catch it. I think this time, instead of trying to catch my chakra, I pushed it. I have a clear recollection of the feeling of it banging against something, as if it was banging against another inner pool. In a split second, the comic book was reduced to ashes. Half the living room was frozen before I even had time to blink. I will always remember Enji's face when he found me sitting alone in a room where the first half had gone up in smoke and the second half was stronger than an iceberg. Enji was so excited that he lifted me into the air, his face on fire like Ghost Rider. Shoto, I couldn't stop laughing. Dad, I think Ray almost had a heart attack when she saw Enji swinging me in the air in a room filled with black smoke. When Fuyumi and Natsuo came home from school, they were very excited to see my altars. They squawked like birds and demanded to see me perform. I was happy to oblige, as it gave me an excuse to use them. This time, instead of tapping into the chakra pool, I tapped directly into the second pool. A mini blizzard appeared in my right hand, while a sputtering flame appeared in my left hand. I tried to concentrate as hard as I could, but I couldn't do more than that. I hypothesized that I had used my chakra to forcefully activate my altars. The chakra had acted as a fuel to keep them going as I demanded. For the first time in ages, I felt happy. I finally had the thing that could make the difference between life and death. Chakra. Thanks to it and the time ahead, as long as I did my best, everything would be okay. Tuya came home late from soccer practice. He looked surprised when he heard that I had activated my quirks, but he smiled and congratulated me. I don't remember the look on his face, but I do remember that his left hand was shaking. Later that day, Tuya came to see me. "Hey, Shosho." I sat on the wooden steps of the veranda and thought about what to do next with my training. Enji was only able to train me 3 times a week and only in the mornings. The rest of the time, I was as free as a bird, and since I had no school to go to, I had a lot of time to kill. I would need a clear, rigorous, and precise training for the next 2 years. Tuya sat next to me, but there was enough distance between us that I didn't feel any pressure. I was grateful. "Listen." For the last time on the bridge, he fell silent. His lips were pressed together in a thin white line. His left hand was shaking. I wondered if it was a side effect of his altar. "I know. I don't blame you. Anyone in their right mind would put their own lives first in a situation like this, let alone a child. It was a no-brainer. No hard feelings? I wouldn't trust him with my life, but I didn't blame him. Or, now that the terror was over, I no longer held it against him. No hard feelings. It was the first time Tuya smiled at me sincerely. There was still that strange gleam in his eyes, but I chose to ignore it. I guess he was just a weird kid. There was nothing to worry about. I looked up at the sky and the stars. Given enough time, I too could live life in easy mode. Mom, I have something very important to show you. Come quickly. Ray paused, shampoo bottle in hand, straining her ear to hear the rest. Yes, Fuyumi? What's the matter? When the little girl didn't answer, Ray sighed humorously and put the bottle back on the edge of the shower. Have children, they said, huh? She slipped in through the open door. Keep an eye on your brother Tuya, will you? The little boy gave her a big smile, his eyes shining. Don't worry, Mom. Take your time. I barely noticed them. Too busy playing with the glittering mermaid I held. She had an awesome tail that shimmered like a rainbow underwater. Colorful reflections, like sunspots, danced on the acrylic surface of the tub. Shoto, do you want more water? I shrugged. The water was barely up to my knees, and I was already sitting in the tub. It is not as if I am going to die with water up to my belly button. The boy turned the faucet on full blast and whistled happily. His fingers slid over the bottles of product lined up in the plastic container. He chose a purple one. It's not the day I wash my hair, I said. His smile was that of a conspirator. We'll do it anyway to make Mom happy. I gave him a doubtful pout, but decided to let him do it. He seemed to be in a good mood lately. In fact, he had been in a good mood ever since he came to apologize to me last time. Since we often trained together without Enji, I got to know him better, and he moved up in my ranking of the least favorite kids in the world. Tuya patted the tub in front of him with his back to the door. Here, sit just there. I did as he asked, still holding my little mermaid. The novelty of it had worn off, and I had her jump out of the water into the depths of the bathtub after only a few moments of play. Tuya crushed the bottle of shampoo with one hand and poured the product into the other one. He laughed out loud. Did you heard that? It made a fart sound. He generously applied the shampoo to my hair and rubbed my head with an intensity that almost scared me. Hey, that hurts. I yanked away from him. The ghost of his fingers floated on my shoulders as he tried to keep me in my place. Sorry. When I frowned at him, he shrugged and added, I always do it that way for myself, he sighed. Come on, otherwise Mom will get angry. I sat down reluctantly, my arms crossed. I had lost the mermaid in my stunt. He began to rub my hair again, but this time much gentler. The water was still running in the background, and steam was coming out. I lay back against the tub wall, my shoulders relaxing in spite of myself. My eyelids suddenly became very heavy. I wondered if it wasn't time for my nap. I barely noticed when he put a hand on my neck. I felt myself slipping into the water, not aware of what was happening around me. Hey, Tuya, don't you think there's a lot of water in this bath? It was so hot that I felt dizzy. My tongue was pasty, and my arms weighed tons. No, I always wash myself with lots of water. Now take a deep breath while I wash you down. He gently pushed my head under the water. Her fingers stroked my hair for a moment to remove the soap. The air was quickly leaving my lungs, but I forced myself to remain calm until he was through with my cleaning. I remember being furious with myself for not inhaling harder so he could wash me off once and for all. I stood there for a while, waiting for him to let me back up to the surface. But he wouldn't let me surface again. I tried to sit up, feeling out of breath. I tried to push his hand. He only held me with one away from mine, feeling my nails digging into his skin. I panicked and opened my eyes wide. The soap burned me, but I didn't close them. There was far too much water, so much that if it weren't for his hand on my neck, I would be floating. My feet throbbed in the water as I tried to find some kind of support to lift myself up, but I was too small, too weak, and the tub was slippery. Suddenly, my toe tapped against a wire that reminded me of a string of tiny beads. I saw one of his hands reach into the water to put the shower trap back in place, but I had 2 feet and he only had one hand free. He slapped my feet with his hand. I redoubled my efforts and hit his hand as hard as I could, trying to get a hook in the wire between my toes so I could pull it out. His elbow dug into my shins as he tried to keep me from wiggling. I kept hitting him as hard as I could, pulling on the wire with everything I had, trying to get the water to flow down the drain. Enough water flowed down that I managed to swallow a gulp of air by turning slightly to the side. And then he turned the faucet on again. I kicked his hand with my feet in an attempt to turn off the faucet with my foot. He took the opportunity to close the shower trap. I tried to open it again. He turned on the faucet. I felt like I was dying from the inside out. The lack of air made my mind foggy, but the adrenaline was making me fight like crazy. My legs hitting his hand in the hopes of hurting him enough to make him let go. The water was rolling back and forth, and when I managed to catch him off guard, I was able to pop an ear or a piece of nose above the surface. I could hear the water splashing on the bathroom floor and hoped that if I moved hard enough I could get enough out to breathe. But his hand was like bricks on my neck. For every millimeter I gained by moving closer to the surface, he pushed my head an inch deeper. His nails dug into my flesh until diluted blood replaced the bubbling bath water. He pushed me so hard that my forehead hit the tub floor, momentarily disorienting me. For a second I thought about freezing the water. It didn't take long to realize that he would use his altar to boil me alive. I felt helpless. I was powerless. I could feel the pressure building on my lungs to the point where I knew they would soon explode. I struggled, kicked, scratched. My head felt like it was about to burst. Inhaling was the simple solution. Open my mouth. Let the water in. My lungs wanted it. My throat begged me to do it. A fate worse than death. I opened my mouth. For a split second, breathing in the water gave me relief. My lungs expanded. My throat stopped burning. My eyes widened as I realized. My lungs were indeed expanding and my throat was no longer burning. I only had to inhale twice before my lungs were full. After that, I couldn't even breathe in the water. I felt my muscles relax. My mouth was open, my throat constricted. My torso was bent so that my belly button was in contact with the bottom of the tub, but my arms and legs were floating as if I were in space. My eyes looked straight ahead, piercing the shimmering surf of the water. His face was bent over mine. The contours of his body were blurred out. The light bulb behind his head created an angelic halo around his white hair and obscured his face. I could see the faint lines of his hair blending into the pristine ceiling before regaining its shape, but I couldn't see his expression. The water was a moving barrier that made the contours of his face unclear, as if he were melting into the background before suddenly reassembling himself. He moved, blended, reformed, melted again. He no longer looked human. I breathed out a bubble of air, a bubble I didn't even know I still had in me. I watched with envy as it swirled freely in the water, rising and rising and rising. I raised a finger to catch it, to take me along. It stood still, rolling around my finger as if contemplating the idea of actually taking me with it. I tried to catch it in my fist. It slipped through the gap between my fingers and escaped without ever turning back. I watched it until it broke through the surface of the water. Then I closed my eyes. I was just so tired. His left hand was still on my throat. It was shaking. The water was cold in my lungs, but on my skin it was warm, comforting. My eyelids were weighed down with stones. My arms were as hard as marble. My thoughts were frayed, as light and inconsistent as wind. This is the second time we've drowned. My eyes rolled back, and then a hand grabbed me by the neck and pulled me out of the water. I immediately threw up all the water I had swallowed. I got a slap on the back to help me get rid of everything that I had just swallowed. A sour taste ran down my throat. My nostrils were on fire and my eyes stung. I saw Tuya with his back to the tiled wall of the bathroom, as far away from me as possible, his eyes wide open. He looked terrified. I was crying. Someone screamed, "Look at this damned bath, Ray. Look at it and tell me he just wanted to play with his brother." I hadn't even seen her come back. The corners of her mouth were quivering as she laid troubled eyes on the bathtub. "Tuya, why did you put so much water in the tub?" Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the boy turn his face to me. I was physically unable to meet his gaze. He started to cry as well. "Shoto said I could, Ananan," his voice was weak, "and I wanted you to be happy that he was all clean." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to ignore everything going on around me. It was only when my father's steady, comforting hand was wrapped around me that I realized I was shaking. "Shut up," there was no more noise. NG held me tighter. He left the bathroom. I was still crying quietly. It was a sunny day. Behind the orange couch, there was a large bay window through which the sun streamed in. Everything took on a lighter hue under the yellowish glow. The solid wood desk, the plant with yellowed leaves, the color of her bloody fingernails as she tapped on her notebook. The relief of the windows projected shadow lines diagonally across the floor and walls, like jail bars. I sat in the leather chair between the two facing sofas. I think she was a little bit surprised because it was her place. You could tell that it was her place, but I had decided to sit there anyway. She smiled at me with good humor and went to sit on the orange sofa. I felt angry when I saw her immediately scribble a few lines with her pen, but I managed to keep my emotions in check. I had to anyway. I refused to let her or anyone else affect me. What are you drawing? I had decided that I needed to be ambidextrous. I heard about what happened on Monday. Would you like to talk about that? I started with something simple, like brushing my teeth with my left hand and flipping the way I hold my cutlery around. You don't have to answer right away. Take your time. And she really shut up. I think because I was a child, she expected me to find the silence burdensome and would try to fill it at all costs. I felt satisfied when, as I was turning over my paper to draw on the back of it, she realized that I wasn't going to open my mouth and she lost her patience. How do you feel? Something very interesting happened with my chakra recently. Are you sad? She paused. You have reasons to be. I thought I would have to invent jutsu by trial and error. But no, a kind of book, like an encyclopedia, appeared out of nowhere. We might as well talk about something else. The encyclopedia was divided into 5 categories. Each category was related to a branch of jutsu. Nin, Fuin, Buki, Gen, Tai. There was a 6th category called Ninja Knowledge. I really like the sun great. Now all you need is your acceptance letter to join the Winks. Bitch. Water, however, a little less. It's not really pleasant to feel your clothes sticking to your skin. There was only a basic summary for each of the 5 disciplines. Do you like water? I only had access to basic information and training methods. Many don't like rain. The idea was that the book would unlock the next level in the discipline I was studying as soon as I met the requirements. Some people in your situation may develop phobias. Have you ever my pencil went right through the paper. I am not afraid of water, her small black eyes shining. The psychologist leaned forward. She gloated. Fear is certainly not the right word. I agree. Perhaps we could talk about concern I don't have concerns. Enji was just outside the door. I had nothing to be concerned about. Her eyes rose to the wall clock. Looks like our session's coming to an end. She looked at me again. Would you like to show me what you drew? She had phrased it as a question, but we both knew it wasn't. I handed her the paper without batting an eye. I had only drawn rosettes anyway, and my breath caught in my throat. In the middle of the irregular circles was a man with very, very broad hands. His left hand was a shaking triangle, his right a fist. He had no face. The therapist took the drawing from my hands. I lowered my eyes. Obediently, I sat back in my chair. I hid my shaking hands between my thighs, watching the psychiatrist under my lashes. She met my gaze over the draft and smiled. If my drawing had tipped her off, she didn't show it. Well, if you ask me, our next drawing sessions will not be out of place. She was hideous with her eyes squinting like a wrinkled mouth. I nodded. She got up and walked around the couch to the door. I watched her out of the corner of my eye and stood behind her. She opened the door. Enji, sitting in one of the waiting room's padded chairs, stood up quickly. He placed his handout and pencil on the magazine-covered table before walking over to us. He stared at me intently before turning to the psychologist. Mr. Todoroki, may I see you in my office for a moment? He nodded. Shoto-kun, would you mind waiting on that couch? It won't take long. I looked at Enji. With his chin, he gestured me to go. When I turned around, I met the scrutinizing gaze of the psychologist behind her golden frame. She raised her glasses with a finger. She smiled again and her face contracted like that of a crying baby. We'll leave the door open. Don't worry. I wanted to tell her to go screw herself, but that would have given her too much food for thought. They closed the door behind me, leaving a gap that was as thin as a strand of hair. I went to stand by the plant like the docile child I was pretending to be. The long leaves scratched my face. I pushed them away with one hand, feeling my irritation grow. They came back at me. I looked around. No one. I raised my left hand and turned them to ashes. Haruka Maki was the best in her field. That's why Enji Todoroki chose her over someone else to help his son. He had paid a lot of money to have a session as soon as possible after the incident. If she could help Shoto, Enji was willing to finance her retirement plan in the Maldives. Mr. Todoroki, thank you for coming in person to this special session. She smiled. I know how valuable your time is, so I'll get straight to the point. Your son is not well, and he refuses to say why Enji felt the need to defend his youngest child. He has always been the silent kind. Maki's smile became indulgent. I can imagine that, Mr. Todoroki, but what I mean is that he didn't even look me in the eye, except for greetings when we were in your presence. In 45 minutes, the only time I could get his attention was when I asked him if he was afraid of water. Enji was taken aback. Do you think he has developed a phobia? I'm not sure yet, but I'm not ruling it out at this point. I would like to know, when you are at home, does he have any problems showering or washing his hands? Enji took a few seconds to recall the last 3 days. Between the hospital, his oldest son's second nervous breakdown, and his youngest son's quietness, his week had been full of events. He refuses to let anyone else into the bathroom when he's in there, so I wouldn't know. He frowned. He always wants me to be within earshot at those times, and I remember hearing the water running. The therapist pursed her lips and crossed out a line on her notebook. Have you noticed anything unusual about Shoto's behavior lately? He's been quieter than usual, but he's never been very break. He's been playing in our backyard more often, and he refuses to sleep alone. You mean he sleeps with you and your wife, right? Nod. Did he often sleep with you before? No, not in our room, but he has gotten used to nap with me when I come home from work. She scribbled again. If I'm not mistaken, you were the one who found Tuya and Shoto in the bathroom. Could you describe the scene? There was almost more water on the floor than there was in the bathtub. The shower mat was overturned and the foam overflowed. Maki was folded in half over her notebook. How did you feel? Enraged. I thought we were here to talk about Shoto. Enji had been so angry that for a split second, he had considered hurting Tuya. It was Shoto's crying that brought him back to reality so quickly. When he had realized what he was about to do to his own child, Enji had suddenly been afraid of himself. Maki looked up from her notebook. Of course, Mr. Todoroki, but I need to gather as much information as I can in order to assess the situation we are facing. Her expression was less severe when she smiled. That was probably why she did it so much. I was surprised, I guess, and nervous, because he had seen himself embedding his son in the bathroom wall. If that had been the case, he would be the one seeing a psychologist right now. Let's talk about Tuya, of course. Enji had expected that. But that didn't mean that he enjoyed talking about him, especially not now. A bitter taste crept into his mouth. They have not seen each other since the incident. I think it is wise to keep them away from each other. No one knows how Shoto or even Tuya might react. It was Rei who needed to be told that. For her, the whole thing was just a temporary crisis, a game between children that had gone wrong. Enji hated himself for saying that about the mother of his children, but he didn't trust her enough to entrust Shoto to her in case she would force a meeting with Tuya. What kind of relationship do you have with your eldest son? Cordial. The pen froze above the notebook. What else? Enji had never liked psychologists. They had shifty eyes and kept all your secrets in folders that they filed away among a whole bunch of other folders full of secrets as if they were worth less than the paper they were written on. I haven't seen him in a few days, since the night of Tuesday to Wednesday, to be exact, when Enji caught him trying to remove the locks from Shoto's door. I would suggest that you keep in touch with him, Mr. Todoroki. I imagine that he has not yet explained the reasons for his actions, but knowing that you are at his side might encourage him to reveal his motives. Enji remained silent for a few seconds. His eyes narrowed. Only the sound of hastily turned paper broke the icy silence of the office. How would you react if you came home from work and found your oldest son drowning his brother in the bathtub? His voice had lost its detached tone and had suddenly become frighteningly calm. Maki didn't even have time to finish her sentence because her whole attention was focused on the Todoroki patriarch. My wife was in my daughter's room, in the next room, and she didn't hear anything. Nothing. Not even the slightest. Not even the smallest sound. Enji's eyes shone with anger. If I had been too tired that day, or if I had decided to go to sleep alone instead of with my son, then Shoto would have died, the psychologist stirred in her chair. When I saw Tuya, Enji fell silent, unable to continue. His eyes became vague, as if he was reliving the scene. The second before he was on the doorstep and the second after he had violently pushed Tuya and had Shoto in his claws. When he had looked at him, his mind had been clouded with anger. He had not seen his son, but the threat that had to be eliminated. His hand had gone to his waist, brushing the ghost of SP 2022 he had worn for so long. Enji stood up abruptly, almost knocking over his chair. Maki scrambled to her feet and dropped a stack of files on the floor. She had not expected the conversation to turn sour. Enji had already turned away. Maki blurted out everything she had to say. "Mr. Todoroki, if you would let me look after your eldest son as well, maybe I could try to mediate and dash." No, the categorical answer startled the psychologist. "May I ask why?" Enji was already halfway to the door. "My secretary will contact you for the next appointment." "Mr. Todoroki." Enji stopped, one hand on the door handle. "Although forgiveness is an important step in the healing process, I strongly advise you not to forgive before there is retribution. People who are forgiven without retribution tend to believe that they are special and that they have done nothing wrong." Maki breathed in. In the case of Tuya Dash, Enji slammed the door behind him. I looked at the door that Enji had just closed. The round handle turned and then the click of the lock was heard. I waited a few seconds for his footsteps to fade. The bed in his room creaked. I approached the tub and took a quick look over the rim. The plug had not been inserted. I turned the faucet on full blast before stepping away. I pulled out a stool hidden under the sink and climbed on it. I undressed as I watched the tub fill through the mirror. My dirty clothes formed a pile on the carpet. I grabbed a clean glove from the closet before gently turning on the faucet. A needle-thin trickle of water began to flow. I waited patiently for it to moisten my glove enough before running it all over my body. I looked like a dog licking its asshole. A small smile stretched my lips. My glove went under my armpits, on my stomach, between my buttocks. I moistened it again before running it over my shoulders and down my neck. I paused for a moment before running it down the back of my neck. I lifted my hair to inspect the extent of the damage. There were 4 red lines on the back of my neck, the same kind of marks you'd find on the face of someone with sensitive skin after a slap. They were slightly curved, like crescent moons, all pointing toward my skull. In places, the lines were broken, like grooves dug by nails. Yellow and green bruises dotted the lines like dirty stains that could not be removed. They were round in shape and uneven in size, like fingertips. "It looks better than yesterday." I gently patted the back of my neck, careful not to touch the crusty lines. The glove passed over a bruise. I pressed my lips together, a hiss of pain leaving me in spite of myself. I turned my head sharply towards the door and waited breathlessly for Enji to burst in. The door remained closed. With tense shoulders, I ran the glove over the rest of my body. As I was getting dressed, I felt a sudden urge to urinate. My eyes automatically went to the toilet, but I made no move to approach it. It was right next to the bathtub. I turned to the shower. The shower head hung from its base on the wall like a sword of Damocles over the cold white floor. Drops of water trickled from its head and rolled down the shiny gray handle. I ended up unplugging the sink and peeing in it. It took me longer to clean it and get rid of the bad smell than it did to wash myself. I washed my hands one last time before putting on my robe over my pajamas. I looked around, trying to put myself in the shoes of a stranger coming to inspect the place. Was there anything that would make it look like I hadn't showered? The walls of the bathtub were still wet and I had dried the sink thoroughly. My clothes were in the basket and the stool was put away. I caught my own glance in the mirror. I gently turned on the faucet to get some water in the palm of my hand. I wet my hair, concentrating more on the ends. Once I was sure no one would be able to deduce anything, I left the room. I had decided to call my magic book the Chakra Encyclopedia. While reading it last night, I had learned an interesting fact. Once the chakra was unblocked, the body of its holder changed radically. The chakra was passively involved in the growth and development of the individual so that he or she would become stronger at a faster rate and be able to perform feats that were impossible for the average person. For example, a child who unlocked his chakra was faster and more enduring than a child who never unlocked his chakra, although not actively using it. A child with an unblocked chakra was more likely to jump from the second floor and come out without a scratch than a child with no chakra who would surely break his ankle. The chakra passively enhanced the individual's body until it reached the limits of human capabilities. Therefore, the physical training my father had concocted for me was fine for a civilian, but totally obsolete for a budding ninja. That's why I decided to multiply it by 3 from now on. My father focused only on the endurance aspect since I was young, and then asked me to review the katas and try to use my altars as much as possible. I had thought that running 4 kilometers at the age of 3 was a feat, but it was nothing for a child with chakra. I needed to increase the frequency and intensity of these exercises to make the most of my youth and time. As for exercises that targeted specific muscles, the Chakra Encyclopedia said I wasn't ready. I also had the idea that my ages were like muscles and that only by using them regularly and emptying their inner pool would I manage to grow them to their maximum. It was the same with my chakra. I was going to start working on controlling it and emptying the pool daily so that it would grow over time. Having a low amount of chakra when it was my cheat code for not dying was the stupidest thing that could happen to me. Since my chakra control was not yet up to par, the encyclopedia had restricted my access to genjutsu, ninjutsu, and fuinjutsu. The book's estimate was that at my rate of progress, the first levels of each would not be unlocked for another 3 months. However, I still had bukijutsu, and the first level throwing and holding kunais was open to me. I also had access to a number of ninja survival skills, ranging from starting a forest fire to skinning an animal to learning how to cover my tracks. On top of all that, I still had to sleep 13 hours a day. I stopped writing for a second, pencil resting just above my paper. Draft 17 and 30 seconds a.m., wake up and breakfast. 8 a.m. warm up. 8:15 a.m., 9 a.m., endurance 1. 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m., chakra control. 9:30 a.m., 10:15 a.m., endurance 2. 10:15 a.m. / 10:40 a.m., snack and break. 10:40 a.m. / 11:25 a.m., endurance 3. 11:25 a.m. / 12:00, chakra control 2. 12 p.m., 14:30, lunch and nap. 2:30 p.m., 3:30, katas. 3:30 p.m., 4:30, knife throwing with the stolen kunais. 4:30 p.m. / 5:30, exhaustion of altars. 5:30 p.m. / 6:45, survival skills. 6:45 p.m. / 8:00, shower/meal. 8 p.m., 8:30, chakra control 3. I didn't have anything else to compare this to, so I didn't know if I was getting too much or not enough out of the schedule. From my point of view, it wasn't too bad, but I would have to put it into practice to see what it was like. I heard someone walking down the hall. I turned off the bedside lamp, put the pencil in the drawer, and hid the folded paper in my trousers. The paper scratched my thigh a little, but it was better than Ray, or worse, NG, stumbling over it and asking me for explanations. Everything went well until I reached the endurance 3 stage. It was almost 11 o'clock. I was sweating like never before, and it was impossible for me to take another step without panting like a rutting animal. I had been running for 20 minutes and I had not even been able to complete the first lap. I took out my paper to make some changes. 9:30 / 10:15 a.m. endurance 2, 9:30 / 10:00 a.m. fast run 10:40 11:25 a.m. endurance 3, 10:40 11:15 a.m. endurance 2. I'd have to reschedule everything, but I'll deal with that later. I put the paper in my pocket and jogged off into the woods. I plopped down on a rock and pulled leaves from a bush before making a pile to my right. I set the timer on my watch and started. It was easy to feel my chakra humming under my skin, as I had never had one before. But getting it to circulate through my body and sticking a leaf on my forehead at the same time was another matter. I could only get my chakra to flow properly to my forehead 1 out of 10 times, and I had to get it there fast enough to keep the flow going and the leaf attached. At the end of the time limit, I wiped my sweaty forehead with my soaked shirt. It didn't look like it, but controlling chakra was even harder than running around like a headless chicken. I refused to walk around like a poor person who can't afford to waste water. A shower was necessary. The only good news of this day was that I ate lunch alone. Ray ate one day with me and one day with the other sociopath, and I hadn't seen a single hair of the useless boy and girl duo for a long time. I don't know what they were told when they asked where I was, but I think NG tried not to pressure me by keeping me a little apart from the others. Not that I minded, since at least I wasn't going to get questioned. The food was good, but I was starving. The chef looked surprised when I asked for more, but kindly served me seconds. Todoroki-sama. Wait, I froze. Did he see what I had just done? He rummaged in the refrigerator before giving me a glass box. Inside were a bunch of sliced fruit and a chocolate bar. I looked up at the old man who smiled at me. For your trip this afternoon, I took the box and went to the master bedroom for my usual nap time. I locked the door after I came in and made sure that the door leading to my room was locked as well. I even took the time to check under the bed and in the adjoining bathroom to ensure that nobody mentally unstable was hidden there. Once satisfied, I collapsed on the bed and set the clock to 1 hour and 25 minutes. I barely heard NG come in and then leave. The afternoon went better. Practicing the katas was a bit boring, but since NG had hammered into me that I had to practice each move 1,000 times before moving on to the next step, combat training, I didn't have much choice. I switched between trying to do the kata combination as efficiently as possible and trying to do it as slowly as possible without losing my balance. After only an hour of training, I already had the feeling that I was getting better. Then came the kunai's throw session, or to be more precise, knives. I managed to grab 5 from the same kitchen set. They were so sharp that touching their edges cut me. That's probably why they were hidden in a dark closet and always packed in their box. At least no one would worry about them disappearing. I followed the encyclopedia's method to the letter, but I was unable to hit the tree trunk that served as my target. The way I held the knives was fine, but I tended to lose my form when I made the motion to throw them. I didn't mind that they weren't real kunais. Sure, the weight distribution and aerodynamics were different, but I was sure that if you gave Kakashi a knife and said, throw, he would hit the bullseye every time, so no excuses. Exhausting my quirks proved to be at least as difficult as chakra control, but at least I didn't have to stick a stupid leaf on my face. Learning the survival skills of the ninja was what I enjoyed the most about the day, even before the katas. I wondered if it wasn't because in the past I was used to having everything done for me all the time, and now I was a bit of a Robinson Crusoe in training. I will never need to know how to start a fire without a lighter, but I found it interesting to learn. I then changed the order between Chakra Control 3 and shower/meal at 8 p.m. I refused to take a third shower due to excessive sweating. After that, I took a couple of minutes to rearrange the schedule for my upcoming days. Draft 2, 7:30 a.m., wake up and breakfast, 8 a.m., warm up, 8:15, 9 a.m., endurance 1, 9 o'clock, 9:30 a.m., chakra control, 9:30, 10 a.m., fast run, 10 o'clock, 10:30, snack plus training hand signs, 10:30 a.m., 11:05 a.m., endurance 2, 11:05 a.m., 11:40 a.m., chakra check 2, 11:42, 10 p.m., lunch and nap, 2:10 p.m., 3:10, katas, 3:10, 4:10 p.m., kunais, 4:10, 5:10 p.m., alters exhaustion, 5:10, 6:25 p.m., survival skills, 6:25, 6:55 p.m., chakra check 3, 6:55 p.m., 8:10 p.m., shower/meal, 8:10, 8:40 p.m., free time. I looked at the timetable, pleased. Aside from fixing the schedule and adding the hand sign training for jutsus, I hadn't changed much. My idea was to keep the same schedule for the next 3 months and change it when the encyclopedia unlocked the next levels for ninjutsu and the rest. The idea of training the hand signs came to me like an epiphany, but I was quite happy with it. In the long run, I wanted to make the signs so fast that the naked eye couldn't see it or perhaps even eliminate them. I also thought it was silly to waste time on my first jutsus, because my hands would be too clumsy to get used to both signs and chakra kneading at the same time. And I was really bored this morning during this break, where I didn't even bring a book to keep me occupied. I put my knives and planner in the glass box and hid them in the hollow of a large oak tree. I was on my way away, hands in pockets, when I heard a voice. I froze. My feet hovered an inch above a pile of crunching leaves. Tuya. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers tightened around the pencil still in my hand. I looked down at the lead. Would this be enough? Sho. His voice came from the edge of the forest, on my diagonal. There were trees with low branches and bushes between us. At this distance I couldn't see him, but neither could he. With my eyes fixed on the lush foliage that separated us, I walked back. I know you're there. Come on, the sun was setting behind the house. I wondered if someone would come and get me before Tuya killed me. I promise I won't hurt you. Okay? I just want to talk. So please dash. A twig snapped under my shoe. I bit my lips until they bled. My heart was beating so fast. I could feel it pulsing in my throat. Sho. His voice was closer. My back hit the oak. I thrust my arm into the hole, my palm scraping the bark in my haste. My hand closed on the box. It slipped off my fingers. I know I shouldn't have done it, okay? But it was just an accident. The leaves crumpled under his soles. I didn't mean to do it. I wiped my sweaty palm on my shirt before shoving it back in the trunk. I was just a little mad at you. But I know I shouldn't have done what I did. My fingers clutched the box as if my life depended on it. We all get mad at times. I widened my eyes. A patch of white hair appeared under a branch. His head was turned away. He hadn't seen me yet. Daddy gets angry sometimes. I threw myself to the ground, making myself as small as possible. The box was wedged between my elbow and chest. Wet dirt and leaves got into my shirt. He kept moving forward. He's a little angry with me right now. I rolled over and took cover behind the tree. Could you tell him that I came? That I apologized? My fingers were shaking so much that I couldn't get the lid off. It was like being in the bathtub when I didn't have the strength to pull the plug, when my muscles were too sore to keep resisting, when my throat was begging me to let the water in for relief. I slapped myself to come to my senses. The thump echoed through the silent forest. I heard him turn. He was walking towards me. Shoto. I tore off the lid. My fingers closed on the handle of a shiny knife. He stopped. His dark silhouette was barely distinguishable from the tree he was 3/4 hidden behind. His hair was like pure, unchanging snow. His clear eyes were wide open, filled with all the hypocritical innocence that children hide behind in order to commit atrocities. He was on the other side of my tree, less than half a meter from me. I spun on my ankles, knife clenched in my quivering hands. Blood pounded against my temples. His mouth opened. Shoto, and it's crouched, terrified, hidden behind a bush and a knife that's never been used in my hands, that I had the coldest realization of my existence. If it was between him and me, I would do everything in my power to make it him. Gradually, my hands stopped shaking. I waited. He continued to search the forest. The more I watched him try to flush me out, the stronger my resolve became. First, I'll hit his leg to stop him from running. A cold breeze rose. Then I will hit his chest so he can never hurt me again. He raised his hand to keep his hair from flying into his face. He waited, and then he walked away. I stayed crouched, eyes wide, until I could no longer hear the sound of his squeaky soles. Then I counted to 1,000. There were only shadows in the forest. A whole bunch of dark and threatening figures that looked like men. But Tuya didn't return. I put the box of knives back into the trunk. But this time I kept one. Days turned into weeks as I kept training hard. Since the sociopath had chased me the other day, I hadn't seen him again. I soon dismissed the possibility of telling Enji about it. He would have forbidden me to go to the forest, and I would not have had the opportunity to train alone. And if I couldn't train with my chakra on my own, then it was as if I was being served on a platter for the day Tuya would decide to take action. I had already run into the useless brother and sister duo on a number of occasions. They always seemed a little surprised to see me, but happy. Rei had told them I was sick and therefore they couldn't see me, so just in case, I could give them what I had. I wondered how long it would take that nosy Fuyumi to realize what was really going on. Or maybe she never would, and I was giving too much credit to a girl who wasn't even 8 years old. I took off my shoes with one foot, leaving them on the terrace carpet. The coolness of the house was in stark contrast to the scorching heat of early summer. The cool breeze that hit me was a welcome relief. My hands automatically performed the 19 precursor signs of jutsu as I walked through the house in my socks. It had become a habit for me to do them as I walked. I wanted my muscles to memorize them so that I would never have to think before I did them. My mind drifted to the next part of my training. The encyclopedia had drastically shortened the wait for my access to the next level of ninjutsu. In 5 days, only a month and a week after I had started my training, I would be able to start learning the first jutsus of my life. I am still his mother. I froze, my fingers on the golden handle leading to the master bedroom. And what a mother you are, Rei. Ignoring him in favor of his brother, cynicism oozed from Enji's voice. I stood on my tiptoes to look through the lock. Rei's face was completely red. Are you trying to talk to me about favoritism, Enji? You've hardly seen any of your other 3 children in the past month. Natsuo keeps asking me where his father is. What am I supposed to tell him? The truth. That Tuya tried to drown Shoto and that he would have died if I hadn't gotten there in time. Oh, I forgot. You prefer to tell everyone that Shoto is sick. Enji sat on the bed with his arms crossed over his chest. Rei stood right in front of him, pulling her hair out with both hands. Stop it. Stop it. Tuya didn't try to kill Shoto. It was an accident. You saw the strangulation marks on his neck like I did. He helped him out of the bathtub. He wanted dash. Say it clearly. He wanted to kill Shoto. Rei let go of her hair. She wrung her hands. I just want everything to be the way it was. I want to see my children playing together peacefully. I want to see them happy. I want what we had before. What changed? Enji, what has changed? She rubbed her hands over her face as if trying to wake up. Shoto is my son too. If I say that he and Tuya should meet again, then they will. Enji's face darkened. Shoto is my son, Rei. He has my name, he lives under my roof, he eats my food. He is mine. His right hand gripped his knee so tightly that I thought it would break. When I say he won't see Tuya, he won't. He and Rei stared at each other. I don't understand you. She stared at Enji as if she was seeing him for the first time. What do you see in him that you don't see in your other children? Enji got up and started pacing. Stop it with that. No, Enji. Tell me because I want to understand. What does Shoto have that the others do not? Enlighten me. Go ahead. Enji had stopped facing the door and pinched the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. Rei was standing behind him on the right. Do you think that I haven't noticed how different you treat him compared to Natsuo? To Fuyumi? She paused. To Tuya? Enji exhaled loudly. I do not treat him any differently. Rei laughed contemptuously. If I, the trophy wife, can figure it out, who else could? She was furious now. Didn't you wonder for a second why Tuya did what he did? She walked over to Enji and hit him on the chest with her finger. Did you ever try to think of anyone but yourself? She almost craned her neck to look at him. Tuya noticed. This whole situation is your fault. Enji shook his head. You're looking for someone to blame, Rei continued. You give him more time, more energy, more love. You blame me. But it was Tuya who held Shoto's head underwater while he struggled. And what do you do now? You shun him. You treat him like an outcast. Enji shouted. He tried to kill Shoto, Rei. She stepped back, startled. I was surprised as well. Enji did not scream. Never. What was I supposed to do? Hug him and tell him that Daddy will always be there for him. The more he moved forward and the more Rei moved backward. You are blaming me for what happened to Tuya, but did you think of Shoto at all? His brother tried to kill him. He drowned him in the hope that he would die. Enji cornered Rei against a wall. Do you think he won't remember anything because he's young? Do you think he has already forgotten everything that happened? Rei opened her mouth. Enji raised his finger to shut her up. Did you know that he carries a knife with him wherever he goes? My breath caught in my throat. Did you know that he only falls asleep when I come home? Enji stepped back and turned his back to the door. He locks the doors behind him, looking over his shoulder the whole time. The boy is terrified. Rei. Every time he looks at me, I feel guilty that I wasn't able to protect him. His voice was quiet now. Force him to reunite with the one who tried to kill him. I can't do that. I can't do that to him, he sighed. Wiped his face with his hand. I wish it were as easy as you say it is. I wish you could blame me if it would make the whole damn situation better. Rei, still leaning against the wall, took a deep breath. Enji's sudden anger seemed to have calmed her. We can't go on like this. Look at our family. Look where we are. Shoto doesn't even call me mom anymore. I agree with you. We can't go on like this. But I refuse to put my son in danger so that your dream of a model family can come true. Rei flinched for a moment, hurt, and then her eyebrows furrowed and her mouth became a hard, cold line. Tuya is also your son? Enji clenched his jaw. A vein appeared in his neck. Don't play with words. You know exactly what I mean, do I? Then tell me what you mean. Tuya is dangerous. You know it, I know it, his psychiatrist knows it. He's not dangerous, he's just a little different. He just needs a lot of attention. That's all. Enji rolled his eyes. Stop fooling yourself. I've seen a lot of people like Tuya who were supposed to be a little different, and they all ended up very badly. Ha! That's the best. Rei left my sight. Enji followed her with his eyes. You are comparing our son to all those murderers. Don't call them murderers. They had problems and they never wanted to face them. That's why they ended up badly. And what should we do, huh? Send him to the asylum and hope that the drugs they'll give him will be enough to change his personality. Enji remained silent. Rei re-entered the field. She waited for Enji to speak, to continue, but he said nothing. Gradually, as the seconds ticked away, Rei's face morphed from angry to stunned. Tell me I'm dreaming, Enji. Tell me you're not really suggesting that we send our son to the madhouse. Enji approached Rei. He put his hands on her shoulders. Rei, look at me. Please, Rei, she stared at the floor. Enji forced her to raise her chin to look him in the eyes. Tuya needs help. Our son needs help, she started crying. It's our duty as parents to help him. We have to. I've discussed this with his psychiatrist and dash. Rei pushed him away and walked away. There was the sound of a door closing. Enji was at the edge of my field of vision, his forehead resting on the bathroom door. It wouldn't be long, just a few months. When he gets better, I hesitated to open the door. If I spoke, would they listen? A few months. If I only had a few months to train. You want our family to get back together, don't you? This is our best shot. Enji closed his eyes. He looked exhausted. Rei, please. Talk to me. She unlocked the door. Enji stepped back to let her out. Concern was written all over his face. I couldn't see Rei's expression, but the cold and indifferent voice she spoke with was the opposite of anything I had ever heard from her. I think we should divorce. Enji took a few steps back as if she had slapped him. I widened my eyes. My socks slipped off and I almost collapsed on the door. A hand grabbed the collar of my shirt and pulled me back. I shoved the hand away and staggered to my feet before I fell onto my butt. Heart pounding, I shoved my hand into my pocket, my fingers closing around the icy knife. A firm, wrinkled hand grabbed my elbow and pulled me to my feet in one motion. The housekeeper gave me the stink eye, a finger over her mouth to tell me to shut up. I dropped the knife. She bent down and peered through the lock. She stood still for a few seconds before standing up, her face closed. Come with me, she dragged me down the hall as I watched helplessly. The door gets farther away.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.